Winterfell slumbered under a sky of pale gray, a muted hush settling over the courtyard. Bran Stark could feel that hush in the back of his mind, as tangible as the cool breeze drifting through the high stone walls. He heard the distant clang of steel from the training yard, the occasional shout of a guardsman on the ramparts, and the soft, thick shuffle of boots on fresh snow. The wind whistled around the towers, carrying faint echoes of laughter from somewhere unknown. Yet it was quieter than it used to be, or so it felt. Winterfell's heart was beating, but ever since he had fallen and lost the use of his legs, Bran perceived the world from a distance, like a raven perched on the highest branch of a direwolf's wood, observing from above. He was wrapped in thick furs, propped up by cushions in a wooden chair near the long gallery overlooking the courtyard. The Stark banner flapped listlessly across from him, the direwolf proudly snarling into the wind. It reminded him of the times he would climb every tower in Winterfell, leaping from parapet to parapet, free as that banner, unstoppable in his curiosity. That boy was gone now, left behind on a tower floor where he had fallen. Yet it was not as if everything had ended for him. He was alive. He could still feel warm fur against his cheek, and he could still smile at the sound of summer snows melting beneath the eaves. He could listen to old Nan's tales. He had simply learned the meaning of patience. But if all the hours of daydreaming sometimes led his mind astray, fantasizing that he could still climb or dance or leap, more often lately, those moments were overshadowed by subtle dread. He was no longer the boy who scrambled up walls just for the thrill. Something heavy weighed upon him, like the press of a lonely, starless night. Sometimes, in the twilight, he would sense something calling him, something beyond any voice he knew. He dreamt of the old gods, of weirwood trees with faces that bled sap, of ravens with 3 eyes beckoning him to crawl deeper into the dark. He tried to explain these dreams to Maester Luwin once. The Maester had only shaken his head gently, insisting that they were the fanciful illusions of a recovering mind. But even after healing, even as the days turned longer, those dreams lingered. They called to him in the hush of midnight, luring him toward the Godswood. For a time he had believed he was fated to make a journey beyond the wall. He had believed fiercely that there was a purpose to it all. But fate can hinge on a single decision, a solitary twist of the tapestry. The day a rider returned from the north with dire news of the king's captivity, everything changed. Lord Eddard Stark had been taken prisoner in King's Landing, accused of treason. Robb called the banners, and Winterfell trembled with the thunder of war. The north roared to life to defend its lord. And in the frenzy of departures, of men marching off with swords and solemn vows, Bran found no chance to dwell on cryptic dreams. He never undertook that perilous journey to the wall. He never dared the haunted forests beyond. He remained in Winterfell, cradled in the routine of the fortress, grappling with the responsibilities his brother Robb had left him. There was no encounter with Jojen or Mira. There was no revelation in a secret cave of roots. No meeting with a centuries-old green seer. No transformation into the 3-eyed raven. He was simply Brandon Stark, a boy of 10 years whose legs no longer worked, who learned each day to be the Stark in Winterfell in his brother's absence. As the courtyard below bustled with fresh signs of life, new men returning from the war in the Riverlands, maesters carrying letters from distant lords, Bran let his gaze drift. The wind nipped at his cheeks, and a swirl of snow settled on the fur covering his lap. He sensed Hodor behind him, standing so tall that his breath stirred Bran's hair when he exhaled. Hodor was a gentle presence, quiet except for the occasional muttered repetition of his own name. He was never far from Bran's side. Bran turned the wooden wheels of his chair a fraction so he could see the entry gate. Another rider had arrived, a man draped in heavy cloaks with mud splattered to his waist. He slid wearily from his horse, beckoned to the stables by a Winterfell groom. The rider looked around with wide, uncertain eyes, as if about to deliver tidings no one would be grateful for. Bran's stomach fluttered. There was too much uncertainty in the realm. Sometimes he worried a day would come when a messenger would arrive with word of yet another betrayal, another death. The war stretched on. Winterfell seemed emptier than it had ever been. Many men had marched south with Robb. Some of them had returned, bearing scars, haunted stairs, or not at all. A soft sigh broke Bran's reverie. He glanced over to find Maester Luwin approaching from behind an archway, the old man's chain jingling softly around his neck. His thinning hair was hidden beneath a hood, and he moved with a certain urgency to Bran's side. The wool of his robes whispered across the stone floor. "Bran," Luwin said in a low tone. "Are you warm enough?" "I'm fine, Maester." Bran forced a small smile. "Do you need me?" Luwin's face flickered, a mixture of concern and courtesy. "There is a new letter from the south," he explained. "I hoped you might join me in the Solar. Lady Stark has been traveling, and we expect a raven from Riverrun soon." Bran nodded, though his heart sank a little with every mention of news. Bad or good, it all felt the same. It made him yearn for the simpler days when he could climb the walls and remain blissfully ignorant of the politics that plagued grown men. But that boy was gone. He gestured for Hodor to wheel him around, and the huge stable boy did so with a gentle care, pushing Bran's chair along the corridor and down the ramp toward the interior of the keep. The route was well worn by now. They navigated the castle's wide corridors, passing one tapestry after another, and made their way to the Solar. Shafts of gray daylight poked through the arrow-slit windows, and the mild warmth of a hearth lingered in the corners. In the center of the chamber was a table stacked with scrolls. Luwin paused to sort through them. Lips pursed, Bran settled into his spot, letting Hodor stand by the wall, idle as a statue. He ran his hand absently over the carved arms of the chair. "Is there any word from Robb?" Bran asked. "Not yet." Luwin unrolled a thin piece of parchment. "But the king in the north, your brother, moves swiftly through the western lands, so they say. He's had victories, but there is always more news to come." "None." Bran nodded, though anxiety tugged at him. That fear had gnawed at him since the night his father lost his head in King's Landing. That horrific rumor that had traveled like a wraith on the wind. He had collapsed in grief until there were no tears left. His father gone, his mother departing Winterfell, his brother leading armies. They all had vital roles to play. Meanwhile, Bran remained here. A boy in a cripple's chair. What of Theon Greyjoy, he asked suddenly. Any word from him? A shadow crossed Luwin's face. Nothing recent. He parted company with your brother to treat with his father. That was many moons ago now, as you know. Bran's chest tightened. He had spent so many afternoons with Theon, listening to him brag about the Iron Islands, watching him practice archery with Robb. They had teased each other and scuffled more than once, but there was a fondness there, beneath the bickering. Theon had once tousled his hair and called him Little Lord. He had given him a dagger from the Ironborn's own stash as a name-day gift. Now Theon was gone too. Nothing felt certain. He forced his mind away from grim reflections. "Let's read the letter," he said. Luwin cleared his throat and adjusted his spectacles. The parchment had a seal of House Manderley, blue and white wax, half cracked. The maester's voice trembled faintly as he read. Describing trade ships along the Bight, grain shortages in White Harbor, rumors of Lannister hostilities. Bran listened, trying to parse meaning from those words. He had grown used to playing the role of Castellan in Robb's absence. Though it daunted him, he did his best. He spoke with the stable master about feed stores, the steward about rations, and the captain of the guards about vigilance on the walls. He was Lord Stark in name, to the small folk at least. And while he felt dwarfed by that responsibility, he wore the title as best he could. Winterfell would endure. Even if he had lost the ability to run, and the realm was shattered by war, he held onto that one truth. Winterfell would stand. Time slipped away in the reading of letters and notes. The day turned darker without the sun, and the hearth sizzled. Servants drifted in, laying new logs upon the fire, and delivering a simple meal of bread, cheese, and hot cider for them both. The hours turned languid and thick, as all winter days eventually did. And by the time Luwin had finished with the last of the correspondence, Bran's back was stiff and his eyes were heavy. The wind rattled the shutters. A candle guttered on the table. Luwin, looking tired himself, pressed his hands together. "That will be all for now, my lord. You've done well this day." Bran forced a small smile and nodded. "Thank you, Maester." They parted ways, Bran wheeling himself to the corridor while Hodor followed. Outside, the corridor was silent, lit by flickering torches that cast dancing shadows on the old stone. No footfall sounded except for Hodor's heavy boots. Bran gazed out a narrow window slit as he passed, noticing how the yard below was fully dark. He felt an odd disquiet. The hush was deeper than before, as though the nights had grown heavier. Occasionally, in that hush, he heard the distant cry of a raven or the howl of a lone wolf out in the forests. It reminded him of something he had once dreamed, a voice calling him to come north, to come to a place of ancient roots and secrets older than the first men. But he had not gone, and so the dreams remained dreams. They moved through the shadowed halls, down a small ramp, eventually reaching the door to his chambers. He asked Hodor to help him into bed, letting the large stable boy lift him gently from the chair and lay him among the blankets. The thick furs were comforting. A small flickering lamp illuminated the stone walls. On a table nearby sat a carved wooden direwolf, a gift from Rickon. Hodor mumbled softly, "Hodor," and gave Bran a friendly pat on the shoulder before drifting away. Alone, Bran exhaled, letting the day's tension seep from him. His eyes closed, lulled by the swirl of thoughts. Perhaps the world beyond Winterfell's walls was full of war and betrayal. But here, at least for tonight, he felt secure. Sleep came swiftly. It brought with it that same old dream. He stood in a forest of weirwood trees, each trunk bone white, each face carved in savage scowls. Blood-like sap oozed from the eyes and dripped to the mossy earth. Ravens perched upon the branches, cawing in discordant unison. One, larger than the rest, turned its head, revealing a third eye, milky white, set in the middle of its brow. Bran felt his heart pound in the dream, a frantic staccato. He wanted to run, but here, in dream, he had the use of his legs again. He could move, he could run, he could sprint across the cold ground and vanish into the darkness. Yet something compelled him to stay, to gaze up into that raven's unsettling stare. "Come," the bird called in a voice older than the trees themselves. "Follow." In the dream, Bran took a tentative step, but before he could go further, a bitter wind whipped through the grove, scattering ravens in a flurry of black wings. The faces on the trees began to wail like mournful ghosts. An unseen force pulled at Bran's arms and legs. He stumbled back, losing his footing in the snow, and tumbled down into darkness. He awoke with a gasp, heart hammering. For a moment, fear pinned him, and he half expected to feel the sting of pine needles or cold earth under him. But it was only his bed, only the comforting gloom of his chamber. He blinked in confusion, breath shallow. He remembered that dream so vividly, as if it were more than a mere fancy. Yet, while once he might have let this dream guide him, he was not that boy anymore. The three-eyed raven's call would remain unanswered. The next morning arrived with a storm. Snow whipped across the battlements, forming drifts against the walls. The wind howled down the chimney, rattling the shutters. Bran stirred from uneasy sleep to find the air inside his chambers so cold that his breath curled in little wisps. Servants soon arrived, building up the fires, offering him a warm basin and fresh clothes. Hodor came soon after to help him dress. While Hodor pulled a thick woolen tunic over his head, Bran asked for news of the day. Hodor only murmured his name and gave a massive shrug. Another day in Winterfell. Another day to carry the weight of responsibilities on narrow shoulders. But with that sense of gloom came a persistent spark of determination. He was Bran Stark. And though the world outside might be battered by war, he would do all that was expected of him. Once dressed in his layers, he let Hodor carry him down the stairs to the great hall. The logs in the hearth roared, bathing the high-ceilinged chamber in flickering gold. The hall was mostly empty, save for a smattering of household servants, a few watchful guards, and Maester Luwin hunched over the table, scanning a tattered map. Bran noted the tightness around Luwin's eyes, the anxiety in his bearing. "Is something wrong?" Bran asked as Hodor set him down in his chair. Luwin looked up, blinking. "A raven came at dawn," Word from the warfront. Well, more conflict along the northern coasts. Ironborn raiders. He broke off, lips thinning. It seems Balon Greyjoy has declared himself king of the Isles and the North. Bran's stomach twisted. Theon's father. That name was like a cold blade in the gloom. But is Theon with them? Luwin only gave a helpless shrug. We cannot be certain. The message from Torrhen's Square suggests that Ironborn longships have landed in force. The garrison is under siege. Lord Roderick has responded, but who knows if it will be enough? Bran stared at the flickering flames, his heart pounding. He recalled Theon's proud boasting, his restless spirit, his desire for his father's approval. But Theon had been a friend to Robb, had he not? Yet the Ironborn were attacking his homeland. Should we send men? Bran asked, though he knew their resources were limited. Luwin pressed the tips of his fingers together. We have few to spare. Most have gone south with Robb. There is some small garrison left, but to send them would leave Winterfell nearly defenseless. Bran's eyes drifted toward the doors. The memory of that dream forest loomed in his mind. He felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind outside. We can't abandon the people of the North to raiders, he said, voice trembling. No, Luwin agreed. But we must be cautious. Bran closed his eyes for a moment, trying to think with the calm focus he had seen in his father and brother. Speak with Sir Roderick, he said. We'll find a way. At that, Luwin gave a slight bow, relief evident in his posture. Though Bran was still a child in so many ways, in moments like these, he glimpsed how leadership felt. The weight of others' hopes and fears resting squarely on his shoulders. That weight only grew in the days that followed. Tales of Ironborn raids trickled back. Small villages along the coast ravaged. Fisherfolk forced to flee. The men left in Winterfell readied themselves, muttering about how to defend the castle if the longships sailed up the White Knife. Weeks passed in a tense hush, overshadowed by the storms that battered the walls. In the midst of it all, nights brought Bran the same relentless dream. He saw that raven with the third eye. He heard it calling him. But each time, an opposing force intervened. Wolves howled in the distance, or the wind roared so fiercely that it drowned out the raven's voice. Bran would wake, panting, heart thudding, uncertain whether to dread or yearn for that distant summons. One particularly bitter dawn, as pale sunlight struggled through snow-heavy clouds, a horn blew from the eastern watchtower. Bran was at his usual place near the library tower window, looking out over the courtyard with a silent sense of foreboding. He froze at the sound, pulses of alarm sounding in his ears. Hodor, startled, echoed the horn in a soft Hodor? The notes of the horn's call were clear. A warning. The gates were opening, not for a friend but for something else. Bran swallowed, motioned for Hodor to move him toward the gatehouse. Servants and guards were gathering. The courtyard was full of boot prints in the fresh snow, and the sky overhead glowed a dull white. By the time Bran arrived, the watchers on the walls were calling down. A small group approached the main gate. No more than 5 riders. They bore the Kraken sigil on their banners. A hush fell over Winterfell. Bran's breath caught in his throat. Ironborn here. As the gates groaned open, a swirl of wind and swirling snow eddied around the newcomers. The riders filed in, their horses snorting clouds of steam. At the fore was a slender man with a close-cropped beard and dark hair. He wore a cloak trimmed with seafaring leathers and carried a spear strapped to his back. Even from a distance, Bran saw the worn lines of exhaustion on his face. Behind him came 4 others, equally travel-worn. They halted in the center of the courtyard. One of the Winterfell guardsmen stepped forward. Name yourselves and state your business. The slender man raised a hand in a gesture of peace. I am Dagmar Cleftjaw, sworn man to House Greyjoy. His voice echoed in the hush. We come under a banner of parley. We would speak with the lord of this castle. Bran's heart thumped harder. He told Hodor, take me forward. But before they moved, Maester Luwin appeared, along with Sir Roderick Castle. The older knight had stern lines etched into his face, his whiskers white with frost. He surveyed the Ironborn party with caution, hand resting on the hilt of his sword. Dagmar dismounted. He looked around, then his gaze settled on the small boy in the wheeled chair. He almost started to speak, but Sir Roderick cut him off with a firm, "What do you want?" "We want to discuss terms." Dagmar's voice was rough as the sea. "Lord Balon Greyjoy will have the north. You cannot oppose him, but perhaps we can avoid bloodshed here, if the Starks yield and swear fealty." Sir Roderick stiffened. "You come to Winterfell, the seat of House Stark, and presume to demand our surrender?" There was a palpable tension in the air. Bran felt his chest tighten. He recalled Theon's face, Theon's wry grin. Did Theon condone this? Or was Theon even alive? Bran found himself speaking before he quite realized it. "You say you come under a banner of parley. Does Theon Greyjoy ride with you?" Dagmar's expression flickered. "Lord Theon commands another company. He sails the coast to secure the north in the name of his father." The unspoken words weighed heavily. Theon was with them. Theon had turned against the Starks. Bran had to fight to keep the tremor from his voice. "Winterfell will not surrender," he declared, small voice echoing in the courtyard. "Robb Stark is our king. We will not bend the knee to Balon Greyjoy." Dagmar studied Bran with a mixture of pity and condescension. "Your brother wages his battles far to the south. You are alone here, little lord." Sir Roderick's hand tightened on the pommel of his blade, but he did not draw it. Maester Luwin, stepping forward, attempted a measured tone. "You come demanding fealty. You'll find no welcome in Winterfell for such talk." Still, Dagmar did not reach for a weapon. "I only speak truth. We have enough men to seize this castle by force if we so choose. But Theon, he remembers you with fondness, boy. He commanded we offer you a chance to yield. Save the bloodshed. Then..." Bran's voice wavered, anger flaring in his chest. "He is no brother of mine." Dagmar exhaled, glancing around at the ring of northern guards, at the archers on the walls, at the battered but still formidable fortress. "We will wait here until dawn on the morrow. If you do not yield the castle, we will depart, and you will see our sails again, along every coast and river of the north, until Balon sits the high seat of Winterfell. All the grief that follows is on your head." With that, he gestured to his men. They dismounted, though carefully, as if uncertain whether the swords and spears of Winterfell would come raining down upon them. The swirl of snow fell heavier, dusting their cloaks. Sir Roderick spoke quietly to the guards, ordering them to watch the Ironborn, but not to strike first. The tension was thick, like the bristling hair on a wolf's back. At last, the party was escorted into a corner of the courtyard, under guard. The yard slowly emptied, men returning to their posts, though eyes were wary and hearts were troubled. Bran, with Luwin and Roderick, retreated to a small council chamber overlooking the Godswood. Once inside, the old knight paced, his breath still ragged from the cold. Luwin spoke first. "We cannot allow the Ironborn to keep raiding our lands, but we have so few men." Sir Roderick nodded, scowling. "And our best fighters followed Robb south. We have enough here for a defense, but if Theon truly comes with a larger force..." He trailed off, letting the implication weigh heavy in the room. Bran, for his part, felt fear and anger swirl together. Everything about Theon's betrayal felt surreal. Theon, who had helped train Rickon how to hold a dagger. Theon, who'd once boasted that no one would dare cross the wolf and the kraken together. Now he had turned on them, using the trust that given him to strike while they were vulnerable. Yet, it made a bitter sense. Theon had always yearned to be seen as worthy in his father's eyes. Now, with the kingdom in chaos, Balon Greyjoy made a grab for the north, and Theon seized his chance to prove his Ironborn heritage. Bran's voice was quiet, but firm. "We won't surrender." Sir Roderick turned to him, sympathy warring with admiration. "Then we must prepare for a siege, or try to muster men from the nearby houses who remain loyal. Perhaps from House Serwyn or House Tallhart. But that will take time. The Ironborn are swift. They move along the water. We cannot be certain where they will strike next." Luwin sank into a chair. "If only your brother were here, or Lady Stark. We are alone indeed." The lamps flickered, and Bran stared at the table. His mind drifted to the dream again, That raven in the weirwood. He shook it off. Dreams would not help him now. He needed clarity. "We'll keep our gates closed," he said, gathering courage. "We'll gather all the people inside Winterfell's walls to protect them. We'll send out ravens to the loyal houses. We'll stand together until Robb can send help. It will be done," Sir Roderick affirmed with a bow of his head. That night, Winterfell buzzed with hushed preparations. Sir Roderick inspected the walls, calling for archers to be posted at every tower. The gates were sealed, the drawbridge lifted. Extra supplies of food and water were stored in the undercrofts. Servants and small folk were ushered inside the keep, told to remain calm but vigilant. Meanwhile, Dagmar Cleftjaw and his men waited under tight guard, apparently content to see if the castle would yield without a fight. Bran wheeled about the corridors, observing the fortress as it shifted into a siege mindset. Men hammered reinforcements into doors. Women hurried with sacks of grain, and the blacksmith's forge glowed bright as fresh arrowheads were made. Part of Bran felt a strange sense of purpose. For so long he had merely observed, feeling half useless. Now, in this crisis, people looked to him. He had to be strong. He had to be a Stark. When exhaustion finally pressed upon him, he allowed Hodor to carry him back to his bedchamber. Outside, the wind snarled through the courtyard. Torches flickered along the walls. He tried to close his eyes, but sleep came fitfully. Even so, the dream returned. He found himself standing in the crypts below Winterfell this time. Long, echoing passages, lined with stone kings and lords, each with a direwolf at their feet. The torches on the walls flickered with ghostly pale flames. In the distance, he thought he heard the flapping of wings, and he turned. There was the three-eyed raven perched on the statue of Eddard Stark. It stared at him, silent this time. A strange dread pooled in Bran's stomach. He took a step forward, but his legs felt weak, as though any moment they might collapse. Still, he could walk. Dreams granted him that. "What do you want from me?" he whispered to the raven. The raven tilted its head. Three eyes blinked in unnerving sequence. Then a roar of sound tore through the crypt. Something like horns, or the clash of steel. Bran whipped around, heart pounding. The darkness surged, and the vision blurred. He felt drawn upward, as if the earth beneath his feet yawned open. He tumbled, fighting for breath, and woke with a gasp in his bed, drenched in cold sweat. His room was dark except for a single candle. The thick stone walls muffled most outside sounds, but he heard faint shouts echoing in the distance. Fear clenched his chest. The siege might already have begun. He struggled to sit, calling for Hodor. The big stable boy, who slept just outside in the antechamber, came stumbling in. "Hodor, help me up," Bran whispered. "I have to see what's happening." Hodor lifted Bran and set him in the wheeled chair, then pushed him toward the window. Bran peered out into the courtyard. It was lit by torches and the moon's icy glow. Men scurried across the yard, swords glinting, bows at the ready. The gates were still sealed, but the tension was palpable. Then he spotted Dagmar Cleftjaw and his ironborn men near the stables, each flanked by twice as many Stark guards. They appeared to be in deep argument, pointing to the gates. One of the ironborn had his hand on the hilt of his weapon. Tension crackled like lightning. Moments later, Maester Luwin came hurrying down the corridor. He paused at Bran's door, panting. "My lord, it appears the Ironborn demand release. They say you have refused to yield, so they will depart and bring word to Theon and Balon to launch an attack." Bran swallowed. "And if we refuse to let them go?" Luwin hesitated. "We hold them as hostages, perhaps. Yet that might provoke retribution, or put Theon's men into a rage. There's no easy path." "Wow!" Bran trembled. He was only a boy. What right had he to make such decisions? Yet, necessity forced him. Hostages could give them leverage, but it might also serve as a spark to an all-out assault. He took a shaky breath. "We can't just let them walk away. If we do, they'll return with a bigger force." Sir Roderick arrived then, flushed from the cold. "We could keep them here, yes. But I fear the Ironborn are likely prowling the countryside already. If we anger them by holding these men, more villages will burn." Bran closed his eyes, picturing the consequences. The screams of small folk caught in the path of raiders, the old lords who might not be able to muster defenses fast enough. He opened them again, resolve forming. "Sir Roderick, keep them another day. We need time to send ravens to our allies, to muster what we can. After that, we will send them back to their ships, under escort, so they can see how strong our defenses are." The knight nodded thoughtfully. "That might buy us a little time at least." "Do it," Bran commanded. As dawn bled across a sky heavy with clouds, the Ironborn envoy continued to seethe and demand their release, cursing the Starks for their stubbornness. Bran had them confined in a small tower house with extra guards posted. He felt uneasy about it. He did not want to be cruel or unjust. But what choice remained? Late that afternoon, after ravens had been dispatched to nearby loyal bannermen, and after extra fortifications had been made, Sir Roderick approached the tower house with a handful of men. They flung open the door and found Dagmar and his companions huddled in the gloom, scowling. Sir Roderick's stern voice echoed in the cramped space. "We will lead you out now. You may go back to your ships, but know that if you try to raise a blade within these walls, you will die." Dagmar spat on the floor, glaring. "We want no fight here. Not yet. We'll see what your bastard brother thinks of it when we return." Outside, Bran waited in the courtyard, heart hammering, as the small column formed. Dagmar and his 4 men, each mounted on a borrowed horse, flanked on either side by Stark guards. The air crackled with tension. Hodor stood behind Bran, and Maester Luwin lingered nearby. Snow had begun to fall again, swirling in ghostly veils. Bran met Dagmar's gaze. For a moment, neither spoke. Finally, Bran mustered the courage to say, "Tell Theon. He should remember Winterfell is not his to take." Dagmar's lip curled. "If Theon is wise, he'll bring more than enough men." They exchanged no further words. The gates creaked open, and the party rode out into the wintry wilderness. Bran realized his hands were clenched tight on the arms of his chair. He forced himself to relax, to take a steady breath. Outside, the wind tugged at the iron-bound gate, as if eager to tear it free. Then, as the last of the riders vanished into swirling snow, the gates were slammed shut. The heavy bar dropped into place. Sir Roderick barked orders, telling the guards on the wall to stand ready. Winterfell might be quiet for now, but conflict loomed. Days bled into nights, each filled with dread. Bran tried to reassure the small folk, tried to maintain calm. He listened to more reports of Ironborn sightings, fishing villages seized, and the rumors that Theon would soon turn his attention to Winterfell. Meanwhile, the dreams continued. Sometimes, Bran thought he glimpsed the weirwood grove beyond the wall, sometimes the crypts of Winterfell. Always that raven hovered, beckoning. Yet each time, something kept him from stepping forward. A swirl of war horns, or a tide of black water. He would awaken unsettled, sweat-soaked. A week passed. No direct assault came. The men patrolling the walls grew restless, scanning the horizon for sails that did not appear. Maester Luwin tried to counsel patience, yet his voice shook with hidden worry. The nights were cold, the shadows long. Then, one gray morning, a farmer arrived at the gate, frantic, half-frozen, begging for help. He knelt in the snow before Bran's guards, telling them that Ironborn had raided his homestead near the Broken Branch. They had been searching for any stray northern soldiers. His family had fled into the woods, though he did not know if they still lived. Word spread quickly. Sir Roderick resolved to lead a small mounted force to drive the raiders off and bring any refugees back to Winterfell. But that left only a scant number of men to defend the castle. They discussed the risks in the Great Hall, with Bran listening intently. "If we don't send help, these people will die," Sir Roderick said firmly. Bran hesitated, not wanting to weaken Winterfell's defenses. But how could he let loyal Northmen suffer? "Go," he said at last. "Take as many men as you need. Winterfell will hold." The old knight nodded, mustering 24 riders. They departed at dusk, steel flashing, hooves crunching in the snow. Bran watched from the ramparts, anxiety gnawing at him. The Ironborn were cunning. Could this be a ploy to draw out Winterfell's defenders? He tried to shake the thought away. He had to trust Sir Roderick's instincts. For another day, the castle was quiet, left with minimal forces. A skeleton crew manned the walls. Bran tried not to worry, occupying himself with an inventory of supplies, conferring with Lewin about approaching storms, and encouraging the servants to remain calm. Then, under the cover of night, the watch horn sounded 3 sharp blasts. Bran jolted awake in his bed. His heart leapt into his throat. He barely had time to call for Hodor before the castle erupted into chaos. Shouts echoed in the corridors. Torches bobbed in the courtyard. Swords clashed on the ramparts. He could see from his chamber window the flicker of flames by the main gate, and in the roiling darkness, he glimpsed what looked like scores of shapes. Ironborn, slipping into the courtyard, muffled by the swirling snow. They moved in small, deadly knots, cutting down unsuspecting guards. Bran's hands shook. Theon had come, or his men had, while Sir Roderick was away. The nightmare had become real. Hodor burst in, babbling. "Hodor!" In an anxious tone. He scooped Bran up, placed him in the chair, and then stood uncertain, as if waiting for an order. Outside, the dreadful sounds of conflict rose, men crying out, steel on steel. Bran felt paralyzed, not by his useless legs, but by the terrible weight of it all. He remembered the final glimpse he had of Theon, that sly grin, the easy confidence as he shot arrows with Robb. Now Theon was the cause of slaughter at Winterfell's gates. The flicker of torchlight glowed red across the snow. Bran swallowed, voice trembling. "We have to find Maester Lewin. We have to." He paused, not sure what to do or where to go. The Great Hall. "We can rally whoever remains." Hodor nodded and began pushing him out into the corridor. The stones felt as cold as the wind outside. Winterfell's corridors echoed with panic. Somewhere, a door was smashed open. Bran heard footsteps pounding overhead. Smoke drifted in from a side passage. The Ironborn were inside the walls. His mind reeled. He had known of these nightmares in the abstract, but to see Winterfell under attack, to hear his people crying out, hammered home the brutality of war. He closed his eyes, wishing for the strength of a direwolf. The clarity of that dream, Raven's third eye. But he was only Bran. He had chosen not to seek that mystical path. Now, he had to defend Winterfell with mortal means. Hodor rounded a corner, and a pair of Ironborn emerged from a side passage, mail clinking, swords drawn. Their eyes settled on Bran, and something like contempt or pity crossed their faces. Hodor recoiled, stammering, "Hodor!" In panic. Bran's heart thundered. He had no weapon, no way to fight. "Out of the way," one Ironborn snarled, flicking his blade at Hodor. "We have no quarrel with you, stable boy." Bran lifted his chin, summoning what courage he could. "Go back to your ships," he tried to say, though the words quavered. "This is our home." The Ironborn sneered. "Your home belongs to the Kraken now. Move aside or die." Hodor's breath came in ragged gasps. Bran could see the fear in his eyes. The stable boy might be bigger than these men, but he was no warrior. He looked to Bran for guidance. Bran's chest twisted with helplessness. How many men had died already tonight? Was there any chance to save Winterfell? His mind raced. Then another shout came from behind the Ironborn. A Winterfell guard lunged at them, brandishing a spear. "Get away from the boy!" The guard's blade bit into the shoulder of one raider, who howled in pain. The other whirled and slashed with his sword. Bran shouted, "No!" The guard fought valiantly but was outnumbered. Steel rang on steel, echoing off the cold stone. In the flickering torchlight, Bran glimpsed the guard's face contorted with desperate fury. But the Ironborn were practiced killers. Within moments the guard was down, bleeding on the floor. Hodor cried out, "Hodor!" in horror. The uninjured raider snapped his head toward them again, raising his sword. Bran felt certain death was coming. Then the man's eyes lifted beyond Bran, and a shadow fell across him. The man's sneer twisted into a startled grimace as a spear erupted through his chest from behind. Blood spattered across the corridor. The raider dropped, revealing Osha behind him, panting. The wildling woman pulled her spear free with a snarl. "Hodor! Bran! "Come with me," she hissed. She looked as though she'd just fought her way out of a den of wolves. Relief flooded Bran. Osha was strong, cunning, and fierce. If anyone could help them escape the chaos, it was her. "Hurry," she commanded, already darting back the way she'd come. Hodor followed, pushing Bran's chair through the gore-spattered corridor. They left the 2 dead Ironborn and the fallen guard behind, each life a testament to the merciless frenzy that had overtaken Winterfell. Bran grieved silently. Down winding passages they fled, the noise of battle echoing in the distance. Osha led them carefully, peering around corners before sprinting ahead. They emerged at last into a small courtyard behind the armory. The snow churned and stained. Torches lay discarded, sputtering in melted slush. Bran could see more Ironborn scuttling across the outer wall, but none were in this courtyard yet. He heard shouting from another corner of the castle, the clang of metal. Flames flickered somewhere close by. Osha crouched, breathing heavily. "We have to find a safe place. They're everywhere." Bran's mind reeled. His father's castle, under the boots of invaders. He felt something coil in him, a wild terror. Then he remembered the crypts. Their secret tunnels. "The crypts?" he gasped. "We can hide in the crypts," Hodor murmured in confusion, but Osha nodded. Good. Let's go." And so they slipped across the yard, the snow swirling at their feet. The sky overhead cast in an eerie orange glow from the fires. Osha, weapon in hand, led them to the entrance of the crypts, hidden behind the statue of a direwolf. She wrenched open a heavy door, hauling it with all her strength. Beyond it lay darkness and chill, the earthy smell of old stone. Bran glanced back, hearing the crash of something heavy. The gates to the Great Hall, perhaps. He gulped hard. "Hurry." They descended a shallow ramp, torches and iron sconces flickering every few yards. The flickers revealed looming shadows of carved stone kings, lords, and ancient Starks. The crypts stretched seemingly forever beneath the castle. As the door closed behind them, the sound of battle muffled to a low roar. In the gloom, Bran's heart hammered. He should be the Lord of Winterfell right now, not cowering in the crypts like a frightened child. But what could he do? He was helpless against armed reavers, and the castle was already in chaos. Osha guided them deeper, occasionally pausing to listen. No footsteps followed, no immediate pursuit. When they were far enough that the echoes above became faint, she stopped, leaning against a carved figure of some ancient Stark. Hodor stood close by, panting. Bran's chair squeaked faintly in the gloom. "What now?" Bran whispered, voice trembling. Osha set her spear aside, the metal clinking lightly on the stone floor. "We wait. Maybe Sir Roderick returns in time to drive them off. Or maybe not." Her voice was grim. Bran closed his eyes, trying not to imagine the Ironborn prowling the Great Hall, tearing down banners. He tried not to picture Theon Greyjoy striding into his father's seat. But the images came anyway, haunting him. The crypts were cold, the darkness vast. He thought again of his dream. He had refused the call to become something greater, something older than a crippled boy. If he had gone to the north, if he had become the three-eyed raven, could he have foreseen this? Prevented it? He didn't know. Regret welled up, a dull ache in his chest. Yet the reality was that he had stayed. And now, if Winterfell were to survive, it would be by the strength of mortal men, and a boy's determination. As they huddled in the dark, uncertain if rescue or doom awaited them, Bran heard the faint moan of wind through hidden cracks in the stone. It almost sounded like a voice, beckoning him deeper into the crypts, or perhaps back out to face the fray. Outside, the thunder of violence persisted. Winterfell was fallen, or on the brink of it, and the night was long. Bran gripped the arms of his chair, feeling tears prick his eyes. He would not abandon hope, not yet. Wolves were built to survive the cold and darkness. And somewhere, if the old gods still watched, perhaps they would guide him through the longest night. The darkness in the crypt pressed close around them, each breath seeming to gather the chill of the ancient stone. Bran listened, heart hammering as the chaos overhead rumbled on. Shouts, the clang of steel, the crash of doors being forced open. It all blended into a roar that thrummed through the floor. Hodor stood near him, wide-eyed and trembling, whispering Hodor in a mournful tone. Osha, still clutching her spear, edged deeper into the shadows. She hissed for silence whenever Bran tried to speak. Her instincts were keen as a wildling's needed to be. Time stretched out without meaning. In the near dark, Bran's senses sharpened. He could pick out the faint drip of water condensing on the crypt walls, the shuffle of Hodor's feet, Osha's ragged breath as she listened intently for any sign they'd been followed. The flickering torch they'd taken from the corridor cast shifting shapes across the carved faces of the long-dead Starks. Stone eyes peered at them, centuries old. Bran felt an eerie kinship with those silent watchers, as though their ghosts observed the fate that had befallen Winterfell. After what might have been minutes or hours, Osha moved. The tension in her posture eased just enough to suggest that no immediate pursuit loomed. She knelt in front of Bran, setting the torch aside, keeping her voice hushed. "We can't stay too close to the entrance," she said. "If they come looking, they'll search the upper levels first. Deeper's safer." Bran swallowed, lips chapped. "Is Rickon safe?" he asked in a trembling whisper. His little brother had been left in the chaos, presumably with the direwolf Shaggy Dog. Osha's face hardened at the mention. "I haven't seen him," she replied bluntly. "We'll do what we can, but I can't save everyone. I barely got to you in time." The guilt settled on Bran's heart like a weight. He was the older brother. He should have protected Rickon. But he couldn't even protect himself. He struggled to keep his composure, though hot tears pricked at his eyes. "We have to find him," he said softly. "Ooh, can't leave him alone." Osha's expression flickered between sympathy and practicality. She placed a hand on the shaft of her spear, tapping it lightly against the stone floor. "We will if we can. But the castle's overrun, don't you hear it?" Indeed, the sounds of violence still rose, though somewhat muffled now, echoing in shrieks of warning and the harsh bark of voices. Bran steeled himself, head spinning. "If Theon's here," he said, "hell want me found. He'll want me to yield. I want." Osha grunted. That's what you must expect. Theon will want the North to follow him, and you're the Stark in Winterfell." She drew a breath. "But you're just a boy, no offense meant. He might think he can make you do as he wishes." "Nixir." Bran nodded. The notion twisted his stomach. He remembered Theon teaching him how to brace a bow, letting him hold a quiver. That Theon had smiled at him in a way that almost felt like an older brother's pride. Now those memories mocked him. They heard a distant crash, louder than before, as if something massive had toppled or been broken open. Then the heavy tread of boots on the floor above the crypt entrance. Hodor let out a fearful moan. Osha motioned sharply for silence. There was no time to dwell on old loyalties. Bran realized that if Theon found them, he'd claim the seat of Winterfell formally, and might do unspeakable things to secure it. The young lord in the wheeled chair would be nothing but a bargaining piece. Hodor's breath came fast. The corridor leading deeper into the crypts was wide enough for Bran's chair, but barely. Osha whispered, "We should move. If they come down, we'll hear them, but we need distance." In single file, they slipped farther into the gloom. The torch danced across the faces of buried kings, each statue crowned and clad in stone finery. Generations of Starks slumbered here. It was a place of reverence, a place that once comforted Bran when he was younger, and still walking, holding his father's hand. But tonight, the crypts felt like a living tomb, cold and foreboding, no refuge at all. They passed the alcove that housed Lord Rickard Stark, Eddard's father. The blank stone eyes stared through them. Farther in, they came to the resting place of Brandon, the Uncle Bran had been named for. Next was Lyanna Stark, resting beneath a stone effigy of her own figure. Bran felt a twinge of sadness at that name, though he'd never met his father's sister. She was said to have been as fierce as any northern maiden who yearned to ride. At last, Osha stopped them in a side passage branching from the main crypt. It was narrower, far less visited. The flicker of torchlight illuminated dusty cobwebs clinging to the ceiling. "We can stay here for a bit," she muttered, pointing to the corner. "We'll hear footsteps from either direction. At least we won't be cornered." Hodor sank to the ground, letting out a long sigh. He looked up at the gloom overhead and repeated his name in a small voice. Bran felt pity for his friend. Hodor had never been one for violence or confrontation, and now they were in the midst of a siege. Osha leaned her spear against the wall, crossing her arms. We need to think about food, water. If this lasts days, we can't just starve. Bran nodded. He wasn't hungry yet, but the dryness in his throat reminded him how quickly thirst could set in. How can we get supplies without being seen? Osha frowned. We might slip out a back corridor, find the kitchen stores, but that's a risk. Ironborn could be everywhere. If they catch sight of you, that's the end of it. An uneasy silence followed. Then, from somewhere above, they heard footsteps on the stone. Slow, measured. A voice called, muffled but forceful. Find them. Check below. Bran's blood ran cold. He held his breath. Osha doused the torch against the floor, plunging them into darkness. The footsteps drew closer, and faint torchlight glimmered at the mouth of the crypt's main passage. Bran shut his eyes, as though that might help hide him. Hodor squirmed, tears shimmering on his cheeks. Osha moved like a cat, creeping toward the corner, gripping her spear in both hands. In that dreadful moment, Bran thought he heard Theon's voice. Low and urgent. The ring of it was unforgettable, the accent of the Iron Islands laced with forced authority. Check every passage. You find the boy, you bring him to me. The boots clattered, accompanied by the scuff of metal. Someone was leading a half-dozen men, maybe more, into the crypts. Bran's heart hammered so hard he feared they would hear it echo. A minute passed. Or perhaps it was a lifetime. One set of footsteps approached so near that Bran could see the faint glow of torchlight flickering off the dusty floor. Then the silhouette retreated. Osha crouched, every muscle tense, waiting. Another few moments of quiet. Then came Theon's aggravated snarl. Nothing. Let's move on. I want the rest of the keep searched. Eventually, the scuffle of boots faded. The crypts fell silent once more. Bran let out a shaky exhale, tears pricking his eyes. It was real. Theon was truly within Winterfell, commanding these men as though he owned the castle. Osha waited another span of minutes before allowing a hint of light again. She relit the torch from a small flint and steel she carried. In the orange glow, her face was pale, lips pressed together. They'll be back, she said. If they didn't search every corner this time, they'll do it the next. Bran stared at her. What are we going to do? The wildling woman set her jaw. We don't have many choices. I can try to slip out, find Rickon, gather some supplies if luck favors us. But I can't promise I'll be able to come back without leading them right to you. No. Bran looked at Hodor, who seemed too frightened to move. He felt a pang of guilt for wanting to keep Osha near, yet Rickon might be lost somewhere in the chaos above. Should I stay with Hodor? Osha nodded grimly. Aye. You two stay here. Stay quiet. Don't leave the crypt. If I don't come back, she trailed off, then forced a wry smile. You can say a prayer to your old gods that I will. She knelt by Bran, placing a rough hand on his shoulder. Don't lose hope, little lord. The night's darkest before dawn. No. It wasn't much comfort, but Bran appreciated her steady gaze. Then she stood, extinguished the torch again, and eased away, footsteps receding into the gloom. After that, Bran and Hodor were alone. In the silent dark, time slowed to a drip of fear and uncertainty. Bran remembered old Nan's tales. Stories of what lurked in crypts after midnight, spirits of dead kings who roamed the halls. Though he tried to steady himself with logic, knowing they were only stories, his imagination insisted the shadows were crawling with ghosts. He forced his thoughts elsewhere, focusing on the memory of warm days in the courtyard, the sound of summer howling at the sky. Summer, his dire wolf, that beloved companion, was somewhere above, perhaps caged or killed if Theon had his way. Summer might be free, or trapped in the kennels. The image of Theon ordering someone to slay Summer chilled him anew. Hodor's breathing, ragged and shallow, seemed loud as thunder in the stillness. After some time, Bran reached out and touched Hodor's hand. The stable boy jumped, then realized what was happening. He squeezed Bran's hand in return, as though clinging to a lifeline. Minutes blurred into hours. Neither boy nor man had any means to track the time, save the faint changes in sound from above. Now and again they heard scuffling, faint calls, distant shrieks. At one point, they heard a woman crying. At another, they thought they heard a direwolf's growl. But the echoes twisted in the corridors, impossible to follow. At length, exhaustion weighed on Bran, though fear sharpened his nerves. His eyelids drooped, but each time he began to nod off, a distant clang or shout would jolt him upright. He felt the chill seeping through his furs into his very bones. Hodor, seated beside him, rocked gently, humming a tuneless murmur of Hodor. Hodor, under his breath as though to calm himself. Bran drifted in and out of uneasy half-sleep, and in that hazy realm, he saw once more the image of the three-eyed raven. It perched on a weirwood throne, cawing silently, beckoning him north. But the dream was muddled by the clash of swords and the face of Theon Greyjoy. Theon stood with a crown of driftwood, claiming Winterfell for his own. A swirl of black feathers separated them, and when Bran reached out he felt only emptiness. He woke with a small gasp. At first, he wasn't sure what had yanked him from the dream. Then he realized Hodor was shaking him gently, sounding distressed. "Hodor, Hodor." Bran blinked, peering into the darkness. There was a shape moving at the edge of the corridor, flickering in the faintest scrap of light. He froze, heart skipping. But the shape was small, not large enough for an armored Ironborn. As it inched closer, Bran glimpsed a tuft of curly hair and heard a quiet sniffle. It was Rickon. Bran nearly cried out in relief. Hodor exhaled a shaky breath. Rickon, carrying something in his arms that looked like a half-burned torch, stumbled closer. His face was tear-streaked, red-eyed, and the direwolf Shaggy Dog pressed to his side, hackles raised. The wolf growled under its breath, eyes reflecting faint light. "Rickon," Bran whispered, beckoning him closer. "Gods, you're safe. Where have you been?" The younger boy didn't answer immediately. He slumped down, trembling, letting Shaggy Dog sniff at the stones. At last, in a voice thick with tears, Rickon said, "They're bad men. They hurt some of our people. They were chasing me, so I ran. Came down here. Shaggy bit one of them." Bran swallowed a hard lump in his throat. "How? How did you get away?" Rickon shrugged, hugging his knees. "Shaggy Dog scared them. Then I remembered how you'd said the crypts are a safe place to hide. I snuck past a few of them." Bran and Hodor exchanged glances. The darkness pressed in. Rickon's face shone pale, the wolf's eyes glowing green in the dim. Though relief filled Bran, fear surged as well. Now Rickon was here, but Osha was still out there. If the Ironborn found her, or if she'd been caught. Bran slowly reached over, placing a hand on his brother's shoulder. "I'm glad you found us." Rickon huddled closer. Shaggy Dog sniffed at Bran's hand, then nuzzled against him. The wolf was big for his age, bristling with tension, as though still ready for a fight. Bran wondered about Summer. Where might his own direwolf be? For a time, they simply sat, listening to the uneasy hush. Rickon told them in halting words about the men he'd seen. The Ironborn with their salt-stained leather, the harsh commands, the way they'd forced open doors and yelled at the small folk to bow. He didn't mention Theon by name, either not recognizing him or not understanding his role. Bran took no comfort in that. Finally, Rickon asked, voice trembling, "Where's Mother?" Bran had no answer. Catelyn Stark was off in the south, supporting Robb's war. She likely had no idea that the Iron Islands had turned their attention north. Rickon's question opened a well of helplessness in Bran and I. Their mother and an older brother could do nothing to save them from this nightmare. They were alone. Time crawled on, measured by the pounding of Bran's heart. Eventually, a flicker of torchlight danced somewhere in the crypt's main passage. Bran tensed, warning Rickon and Hodor to hush. The glow swayed like a will-o'-the-wisp approaching. In the eerie light, a figure stepped into view, spear in hand. Osha. Bran nearly sagged with relief. Rickon clung to Shaggy Dog, uncertain, until Osha hissed, "It's me." Quiet. She moved swiftly to their corner of the crypt, kneeling and lifting the torch so she could see them all. Sweat and grime coated her face, and a bruise darkened her temple. "You found the little one," she said, eyeing Rickon. "Good." Bran's face lit with cautious hope. "You're alive. Did you see Summer? Did you?" Osha shook her head, cutting him off. "I only found a locked kennel and some of the castle dogs inside. Could be your wolf is roaming free or caged somewhere else. The place is swarming with Ironborn. They've posted watchers on the ramparts, in the yard. But Theon's taken the Great Hall, installed himself there." Bran felt a sick twist in his belly. "So they've truly occupied Winterfell?" Osha nodded. "They have. Sir Roderick and his men are still away, no sign of them. The men who were left behind in the castle, some surrendered, others were cut down. The Ironborn keep calling for you, boy. They think if they show you off, Winterfell will follow." Rickon trembled, burying his face against Shaggy Dog's fur. Hodor stared at Osha, as though she were a ghost. Bran steadied himself. "What can we do?" She exhaled. "We wait. You three keep hidden until we see if Sir Roderick returns with enough force to break Theon's hold. If not," her mouth set in a grim line, "we might need to run." Bran considered the possibility. Abandon Winterfell to the Ironborn. The notion cut at him like a knife. This was his home, the seat of the Starks for generations. But living to fight another day might be the only choice if no rescue came. He pressed for details. "How many Ironborn are there? Could we slip past them in the night?" Osha shrugged. "They're not a legion, but they're enough to hold the castle against a few scattered guards. They know their business, and they've posted watchers. The walls are patrolled. We might escape, but not easily." She tossed him a small bundle she'd carried under her arm. "Food. The kitchens were half in flames, but I salvaged some bread and dried meat." Bran's stomach growled at the sight of it, his mouth dry. "Thank you," he murmured. Rickon hungrily tore off a chunk of bread, feeding a bit to Shaggy Dog. Even Hodor accepted a piece, chewing in anxious silence. While they ate, Osha relayed more of what she'd seen. Ironborn looting the halls, mocking Winterfell's traditions, tossing the direwolf banners in a corner as if they were worthless scraps. She had glimpsed Theon barking orders, instructing a man named Black Lauren to secure the battlements. The atmosphere was tense, as if Theon knew that holding Winterfell was a precarious prize. Tired from her foray, Osha finally slumped against a wall. "I'll stand watch for a spell," she said. "You lot rest as you can." Bran tried to lean back in his chair, but it was hardly comfortable. Sleep felt distant, yet his eyelids drooped from sheer exhaustion, and he drifted into a fitful doze. Images flickered behind his closed eyes. Theon's smirk, the flurry of ravens in that dream he'd been having for weeks, the weirwood trees, his father's solemn face. He dreamt of climbing again, fearless and strong, only to slip from a tower into the blackness. When he startled awake, Osha was pressing a hand over his mouth. Footsteps echoed again in the crypt's main corridor, accompanied by slurred cursing. Another search party. In the faint glow of the torch, shielded by Osha's body, Bran made out Rickon huddled behind Hodor, Shaggy Dog growling quietly. A voice rang out, thick with drink or frustration. "Damn these cursed stones." "The boy's not here," another voice answered. "We'll search every tomb if we must. The prince says to find him. Next time we see you skipping corners, I'll put a sword through your gut." Their footsteps and the flicker of their torches approached. Shaggy Dog bristled, a low rumble escaping his throat. Bran's heart galloped in his chest. If the wolf barked or lunged, they'd be discovered. He reached out, trembling, to place a hand on Shaggy's flank, hoping to calm him. The men came closer. Bran could hear their chainmail rustling, the ragged breath of one who might be injured or simply drunk. He saw faint orange light on the wall. Then the men paused. One of them muttered, "Nothing here," with a forced bravado. He heard the scuff of boots against stone. Then they turned away, moving down the main passage. Their torches receded. Osha exhaled slowly. This pattern repeated itself throughout what felt like the long, endless night. Every so often, Ironborn would wander into the crypts, searching, cursing. Each time, Bran and the others went tense, hearts pounding. Sometimes they might hear Theon's voice echo in the distance, urging speed, cursing the whelp who dared hide from him. The sound of that once familiar voice speaking with such malice chilled Bran to his core. They slept in snatches, nibbling the meager rations Osha had acquired, flinching at every echo. Rickon cried softly for mother and father in his sleep, clinging to Shaggy Dog as though the wolf were the only solid thing in the world. Bran felt a swirl of guilt that he had no better comfort to give. Eventually, a new day dawned. There were no windows in the crypt to let in the morning light, but Bran could sense the shift. The footsteps overhead grew more frequent, the voices sharper as the Ironborn reasserted themselves in daylight. The castle was theirs for the moment. Osha decided to scout once more, urging silence in her absence. She left them with one torch. "Don't light it unless you have to," she warned. "We don't need that glow leading them right to you." She vanished up the steps. In the stillness she left behind, Bran began to wonder if there was any hope at all. Could they truly hold out for Ser Rodrik to return? What if he never came back, or if Theon's men caught them in the crypt first? Another wave of despair crashed over him. He tried to hold it at bay by focusing on Rickon, who must be even more frightened. They talked softly about simpler things. Memories of the last harvest feast, the time father had taught them both how to seat a horse, the days when Robb and Theon had laughed together as if they were inseparable. That memory stung, but it reminded them that there had been good times once. The hours crawled on. Hodor hummed to himself, rocking slightly whenever footsteps sounded overhead. Rickon drifted in and out of sleep, face streaked with dried tears. Bran kept turning the small carved direwolf figure in his pocket, the one Rickon had given him before. The edges of the carving dug into his palm, real and grounding in the midst of uncertainty. At last, Osha returned, her footsteps a welcome sound in the gloom. She slipped into their side passage, face grim. "There's trouble," she said, words hushed but urgent. Ser Rodrik came back. Bran's pulse leapt. "He's here. Is he fighting?" Osha nodded curtly. "He rode in with a few men, not many. Apparently he split his forces trying to help that village. Theon claims to have your younger siblings as hostages. Ser Rodrik's men are out in the courtyard, but Theon's threatening to kill anyone who tries to storm the walls." Bran's thoughts whirled. "My younger siblings? He has us. We're down here." Osha looked away, uncertain. "He told Ser Rodrik that he has you, that you've yielded. Maybe it's a bluff, or maybe he caught your wolves, or I'm not sure. He's using it as leverage." The cold clarity seeped into Bran. Theon might be lying outright to hold off Ser Rodrik, but that meant if Ser Rodrik tried to fight, Theon would have no trouble doing something brutal to prove his point. Will Ser Rodrik believe him? Osha shrugged. He seemed torn. He knows Theon can't be trusted, but he doesn't want to risk your lives if it's true you're hostages. Bran's throat felt tight. Ser Rodrik must have some plan. Osha snorted softly. "He's demanding Theon release you and your brother. Theon, from what I saw, wants him to lay down arms and acknowledge Balon Greyjoy as King of the North." She spat in disgust. "We both know that won't happen." A thick, uneasy silence settled over them. If Theon discovered Bran was not in his clutches after all, he'd be enraged, perhaps desperate enough to do anything. But if Ser Rodrik attacked while believing Bran was a captive, that put them at enormous risk. Rickon whimpered, clinging to Bran's side. "We have to help them," he said. "We can't let Theon kill Ser Rodrik." Bran felt the stirrings of a plan form in the back of his mind, though it was half-formed and dangerous. He thought of his father's words. Sometimes cunning was a better shield than steel. "If we show ourselves to Ser Rodrik," Bran said slowly, "then Theon's lie is exposed." Osha gave him a sharp look. "Aye. And once Theon knows he doesn't have you, he might do something worse." Hodor shifted anxiously, repeating his name under his breath. Shaggy Dog gave a low growl, as if he sensed the tension. Bran stared at the torch's weak flame. He was just a boy, with no training in warfare, no counsel beyond Osha's. And yet, The fate of Winterfell seemed to hang on his next move. He remembered once how he had soared across the rooftops, climbing and jumping with a fearless heart. Now he felt that fearlessness stir, but tempered by reality. This was not a game. If they misstepped, men would die. He would die. "Is there a way to reach the outer walls unseen?" he asked. "A place we can stand and be seen by Sir Roderick, but not easily seized by Theon's men." Osha rubbed her chin, thinking, "The ramparts above the eastern gate, maybe. But it's risky. The Ironborn keep watch. They might see us." Nagdimdaus. Bran took a breath, the idea taking shape. "We should do it at dusk, or at dawn when the light's bad. If we can get Sir Roderick's attention, let him see we're free. He might call Theon's bluff." Rickon looked at him with wide eyes. "What if Theon catches us?" Bran placed a hand on his brother's arm. "We'll be careful, but we can't hide in the crypt forever." Osha studied him for a moment. In the torchlight, her features were carved with harsh lines of worry and resolve. "We can try," she said at last. "If it's your wish, but I hope you're ready for the risk." "Manson," Bran nodded. "Winterfell is our home. We have to do something." They all felt the truth in that. Even Hodor, though he muttered. Hodor, in a trembling voice, gave a small nod, as if to say he was with them. As they prepared for dusk to come again, Osha rummaged through the crypt for anything that might help. She found an old iron bar among scattered debris, which she gave to Hodor to use as a makeshift weapon, if needed. She tested the passages, carefully noting where the Ironborn patrols were concentrated. Bran, with Rickon huddled close, tried to rest once more, but his nerves were wound too tight. Finally, the appointed hour came. They slipped from the crypt, emerging into the corridor that led up a twisting staircase. Each step was fraught with tension, as they paused to listen for any sign of guards. Twice, they had to duck into alcoves as shadowy figures passed, murmuring about Theon's demands and Sir Roderick's standoff. When they emerged into the open air, the sky was bruised purple, streaked with the last rays of sun. A chill wind snapped at them, carrying the tang of smoke and blood. Winterfell's courtyard lay below, dotted with flickering torches. In the gloom, Bran could see a ring of men outside the gates, Sir Roderick's men. Outnumbered and uncertain, the gate itself was heavily guarded by the Ironborn, who prowled the ramparts. Osha gestured for silence, leading them along a narrow walkway behind one of the castle's parapets. The stones were slick with lingering melt from the day's feeble sunlight. Hodor carefully pushed Bran's chair, though it wobbled on the uneven surface. Rickon clung to Shaggy Dog, who moved with surprising stealth for so large a wolf. Finally, they reached a vantage point where they could peer down upon Sir Roderick's position without being too exposed themselves. In the courtyard, Theon paced, flanked by Ironborn who bore flaming torches. It looked as though they were in the midst of negotiations, or perhaps a tense standoff. Bran spied the old knight, mustaches bristling, speaking with fierce dignity. His men arrayed behind him looked uncertain but determined. Bran's heart clenched at the sight of Theon, who wore a breastplate with the Kraken sigil. He seemed older, harder than Bran remembered. The expression on Theon's face was one of forced confidence tinged with desperation, as though he realized how precarious this victory was. Sir Roderick's voice carried across the courtyard, echoing off the stone. "Release the Stark boys at once, or face the consequences." "By the old gods, you have no right." Theon cut him off with a sharp gesture. "Keep your bluster, old man. I have the Stark boys secure. I'd rather not hurt them, but if you press me, their blood will be on your hands. You want to see your precious lordling again." Bran felt a surge of anger at Theon's blatant lie. Even from this distance, he could see the flicker of doubt in some of Theon's men. They must know Theon didn't actually have them. Or perhaps Theon had locked up only their wolves. Or maybe captured a servant boy he claimed was Bran. Sir Roderick drew a breath, steadying himself. "You were raised here, Theon Greyjoy. You are a ward of Eddard Stark. What has possessed you to commit such treachery?" Theon's features hardened. "A ward is a hostage by another name. I was never a Stark. The Iron Islands are my home, and I serve my father now. I am Prince of Winterfell. Bend the knee, or every man who stands with you will die, and the Starks will be the first to suffer. Ninen. In the house. A hush fell over the courtyard. Bran's head spun with fury. He could see Sir Roderick struggling between a desire to call Theon's bluff and the fear that the Stark boys might be in chains somewhere. This was the moment. Bran nodded to Osha, who took a deep, steadying breath. She beckoned Hodor forward. Together they eased Bran's chair into a small nook in the parapet. From there, if he spoke loudly enough, Sir Roderick might hear him. The sky was dark enough to cloak them from the Ironborn archers on the walls, or so they hoped. Osha kept one hand on the hilt of a stolen dagger. Rickon crouched behind them, face pale. Shaggydog's ears lay flat. Bran swallowed his fear, then lifted his voice as strongly as he could. "Sir Roderick," he shouted, his words echoing off the stones. "I'm here. Theon doesn't have us." In the courtyard, the reaction was immediate. Heads swiveled toward the sound. Sir Roderick's eyes widened in astonished relief, scanning the ramparts. Theon spun around, cursing. A torchbearer nearly dropped his brand in the confusion. The old knight cupped his hands around his mouth. "My Lord Bran," he called back, voice cracking with emotion. Bran forced himself to stay bold. "We free," Theon lied. He gripped the parapet to keep steady. His heart thundered, but he continued, "Don't yield to him." Pandemonium erupted below. Some of the Ironborn shouted to each other, pointing at the ramparts where Bran's voice had come from. Theon, faced dark with anger, barked orders. "Up there! Find them!" "Nesho." Sir Roderick, galvanized by the revelation, roared to his men. "He does not have the Starks! Attack!" The men outside the gates surged forward with renewed determination. The Ironborn at the gate rushed to defend, but confusion spread in their ranks. Swords clashed in a cacophony. Theon whirled, face pale. Bran knew they had only moments before the Ironborn on the walls would arrive to seize them. "Go," Osha hissed, tugging on Hodor's arm. Rickon gasped. "But now," she snapped. "We did what we came for." They retreated along the parapet, moving as fast as Hodor could manage while pushing Bran's chair. The rampart was narrow, requiring caution to avoid toppling over the edge. From below, they heard the clang of a drawbridge failing, or perhaps the crash of men pushing a battering ram. Shouts rose in a crescendo of fury. One Ironborn sentry emerged around the corner, brandishing a crossbow. He saw them and cried out, "Stop!" Osha hurled her dagger with a startling speed, striking him in the arm. He yelped, dropping the crossbow. Blood spattered the stones. "Hodor, keep going," Bran yelled. Hodor lowered his head, gripping his makeshift iron bar. The wounded Ironborn tried to block their way, but Hodor swung wildly, smashing the man aside. The man fell with a scream, tumbling off the rampart to the courtyard below. Bran grimaced, but there was no time for pity. They descended a small stairway, weaving toward the postern gate. A pair of Ironborn appeared, alerted by the noise. Osha yanked the spear from her back and charged them, Rickon and Shaggydog close behind her. Bran's vision blurred with adrenaline. All he could do was hold tight to his chair as Hodor pushed on. Sparks flew as Osha's spear clashed against steel swords. She was agile, dodging a slash, then plunging the spearhead into the gap of one man's armor. Shaggydog leapt, jaws closing around the other's wrist with a sickening crunch. Blood slicked the stones. The man shrieked, dropping his blade. Osha tore free, panting, as the dying man sagged. Rickon stumbled away, trembling. He'd never seen such violence up close. Shaggydog's muzzle dripped red. A wild, feral gleam lit the wolf's eyes. Hodor, the big stable boy, moaned, wide-eyed at the carnage. But there was no time to recoil. They pressed on, heading for the gate. But a swell of Ironborn appeared in the courtyard ahead, cut off from the main battle by the confusion at the front. They spotted Osha and the others shouting, "They're here! Back, back!" Osha snarled, pulling them into a side passage. They darted into a corridor that led to the kitchens. The smell of burned wood and spilled ale clung to the air. Bran recognized the route. They might find the courtyard storerooms from this way, maybe even slip beyond the stables. A crash shook the castle walls. The main gates might have given way, or the outer walls might have been breached. Shouts resounded like thunder. The flicker of torches cast the shadows of men fighting in every direction. Theon's men were pinned in pockets, while Ser Roderick's men flooded the yard. Yet the outcome was far from certain. The Ironborn were fierce, well-trained in sudden strikes. Bran could hear Theon's voice somewhere, bellowing instructions, though the specific words were lost in the din. Osha led them through the smoky remnants of the kitchen. Pots and broken dishes littered the floor. A body slumped near the hearth, a cook or a servant, face pale and eyes open in death. Rickon whimpered, burying his face in Shaggy Dog's fur. Hodor averted his eyes. They pushed through the remains of a scorched door, emerging into the yard behind the stables. Torches flared overhead. Bran saw a cluster of men locked in frantic combat. Sparks flew from colliding swords. He recognized a few of Winterfell's guards, battered but fighting with desperate valor. The Ironborn clashed with them, cursing, matching them blow for blow. The sight was terrifying, the brutality so raw and real that Bran could hardly breathe. He remembered the courtyard lessons he'd watched, men training with blunted steel, but this was no training. This was slaughter. Osha hissed, "We need a way out. Theon will throw everything he has at catching you now." Bran's heart ached, torn between wanting to stand with the castle's defenders and realizing he might be the cause of more death if he was captured. "They'll fight better if they know we're safe," he said. As if echoing his thought, one of Winterfell's guards spotted Bran. "My lord," he shouted, blocking a savage strike from an Ironborn axe. His face lit with hope. "You're safe." That moment of distraction proved fatal. The Ironborn fighter feinted and brought his axe down in a vicious arc. The guard crumpled, blood soaking the snow. Bran's stomach lurched. He let out a strangled cry. The yard was no place for them. Theon's men attacked with renewed fury now that they realized the Starks were on the loose. Ser Roderick's contingent was pushing in, but they too suffered losses in the confusion. The chaos was absolute. Hodor, moaning in distress, tried to steer Bran away from the melee. Osha, panting, guided them toward a gate near the stables that led to the fields beyond Winterfell. "If we can slip out there, we might meet up with Ser Roderick's men or find a place to hide until the fighting's done," she said. A roar behind them made them whirl. Another group of Ironborn spilled into the yard, led by a tall, scarred man with a reaver's gleam in his eyes. He pointed. "The Stark boy sees them!" Rickon cried out. Shaggy Dog barked furiously. Osha swung her spear to keep them back. Hodor gripped the iron bar with trembling hands. Bran's entire body shook with terror. Then, from the side, a half-dozen of Ser Roderick's men charged, slamming into the Ironborn with savage force. Their sudden arrival took the Reavers by surprise, and a fierce clash exploded mere feet from Bran. Swords bit into mail. Men screamed. Blood spattered the ground. Osha pulled them back, out of harm's way, as the two groups tore at each other with vengeful fury. Somehow, by luck or the grace of the old gods, the path to the stable gate opened for a brief moment. Osha seized it. "Go, quickly!" she yelled. Hodor pushed Bran's chair forward, wheels crunching over blood-slick snow. Rickon dashed behind them, clutching Shaggy Dog's scruff. They slipped through the gate, hearts pounding. Darkness stretched before them, the open fields beyond Winterfell's walls. Smoke and flame reflected on the snow, but no Ironborn immediately barred their path. The fighting was concentrated inside the castle, around the main gates. Osha glanced back at the dim shape of Winterfell, sorrow and determination warring on her face. "I doubt Theon or his men expected an escape here," she muttered. "We might outrun them." Bran felt a wave of dread and relief mingle. He was fleeing his own home, but better that than to see it all lost while he remained a helpless pawn. There was still a chance that Ser Roderick's forces could reclaim the castle. If they knew Bran was safe, they might fight without restraint, no hostages to consider. They hurried into the open night, breath steaming in the bitter air. Behind them, Winterfell blazed with torchlight and the sound of steel on steel. Occasional screams broke the darkness. Bran twisted in his seat, gazing back at the tall battlements had once climbed so eagerly. His chest felt hollow. Rickon trailed, stumbling over uneven ground, Shaggy Dog bristling at his side. Hodor trudged on, pushing Bran's chair through half-frozen ruts in the earth. Osha led, scanning the distance for signs of an ambush. Through it all, the howling wind carried the echoes of war. They had escaped the courtyard, but they were far from safe. The Iron Islands had a foothold in the north, and Theon Greyjoy, once as close as a brother, had turned on them. Winterfell might be saved if Ser Roderick prevailed, or it might burn to ashes. Yet for Bran Stark, no matter what happened next, he would not let Theon's betrayal break him. Somehow, in the dark hush between stars, he found a sliver of courage, a spark of the old sense of adventure that once drove him to climb higher than anyone else dared. He was only a boy, his legs crippled, with no great army behind him. But he was a Stark of Winterfell, and a Stark endures. The rising wind whispered through the trees, and Bran lifted his gaze to the distant line of the horizon, where the night pressed in, unyielding. He did not know what lay ahead, only that he must keep going for Rickon's sake, for his own. And so, onward they went, into the cold night, leaving the embattled castle behind. While the fate of Winterfell hung in the balance somewhere between Theon's ambition and the North's resolve. They moved like restless shadows beneath the half-moon sky. Cold air scoured their lungs, and the bitter wind whipped at cloaks and furs. But none of them dared slow. The thin ruts of the trail behind Winterfell were uneven, half hidden by patches of frost, and Hodor grunted with effort as he pushed Bran's chair through the dark. Now and again the wheels stuck on a rock or in a dip, and Osha would crouch to hoist them free, muttering curses under her breath. Rickon trotted nearby, small legs struggling to keep pace, clutching Shaggy Dog's fur whenever the wolf slowed enough. Far behind them, Winterfell remained ablaze with torches, steel gleaming among the battlements as the battle raged. The night pulsed with the echoes of war. Shouts, the clash of metal on metal, the hiss of arrows loosed, and the distant thud of something heavy battering at the gates. Smoke coiled across the moon, obscuring part of the sky. Bran found it hard to tear his eyes from that glow, even though the sight wrenched his heart. It felt like he was abandoning Winterfell to be consumed by violence. He could barely wrap his mind around Theon's betrayal. His father had treated Theon as a ward and a companion for a rob. Theon had laughed with them, shared meals, boasted of the sea and salt winds. Now he was the one who'd brought those same Ironborn raiders to the walls, seizing Bran's ancestral home and threatening anyone who dared oppose him. The cruelty of it felt unreal, as if Bran were trapped in some gnarled dream. But there was no time to dwell on it. Survival demanded they keep going, keep pushing into the open fields and the black horizon. If Theon's men realized Bran and Rickon had escaped, they might send riders to hunt them down, or archers with hawk-sharp eyes. They couldn't stay anywhere near the castle. The wind stung Bran's cheeks, and every bump in the uneven ground jolted his spine. But he held silent, urging Hodor forward with quiet gestures and letting Osha take the lead. She paused at the edge of a low stone wall, squinting into the dark farmland ahead. It was a wide swath of fields once used to graze horses or harvest hay, now dotted with clumps of dead grass silvered by moonlight. A few gnarled trees stood as lonely sentinels across the land. In the far distance, a river glimmered faintly, its surface reflecting streaks of the moon. Osha gripped her spear, scanning for movement. "We need cover," she hissed. "We can't just crawl across these fields in open view, or any passing reaver with eyes will spot us." Bran swallowed, glancing around. To the east, a small grove of trees huddled near the bend of the river. "We could hide there," he said. "No one will see us if we keep to the shadows." She nodded, and they pressed on, guiding Bran's wheeled chair as quietly as possible around stones and low brush. Shaggy Dog padded alongside them, hackle still raised, occasionally sniffing the air as if wary of an unseen threat. Every so often, Rickon stumbled on a clump of half-frozen mud, letting out a quick gasp, and Osha would steady him with a firm hand. The cold bit deeper as they left Winterfell's protective walls behind. The fields were open to winter's breath, though the season was not at its harshest yet. Thin clouds slid across the moon, painting the land in patches of silver and black. Bran felt his pulse roar in his ears, even though the courtyard battle was now a distant clamor. Each time the wind shifted, it carried faint screams or the distant ring of steel, a dire reminder that his home was under siege. Eventually, they reached the shelter of the trees. Branches rustled overhead, brittle leaves scraping like the whisper of bones. Osha led them off the main path, following a faint deer trail deeper into the grove. The ground turned spongy underfoot. Rickon coughed softly, hugging himself, and Shaggy Dog whined as if in sympathy. Bran suppressed a shiver, scanning the dark tangle for any sign of watchers. When they reached a hollow between several old oaks, Osha finally motioned for them to rest. The night was so silent here that Bran could hear Rickon's shaky breaths. Hodor lowered Bran's chair carefully, then sank to the ground, massaging his arms. He looked on the verge of tears, mumbling, "Hodor," as if that one word might anchor him in a reality that had turned savage. Rickon curled up near the trunk of an oak, letting Shaggy Dog lie protectively beside him. The young wolf's ears perked, nose twitching. Bran couldn't help but think of summer. Where was his own direwolf now? The thought hurt like a bruise on his heart. For a moment, none of them spoke. The sky overhead shimmered in a scattering of stars. The battle's glow was blocked by the dense cluster of branches, leaving only that faint flicker at the horizon. Impossible to ignore. Bran rubbed his arms through the layers of fur and wool, trying to summon a shred of warmth. His feet, though lifeless in sensation, still felt the creeping numbness of the cold. Osha ran a hand over her face, smearing dirt or soot from her brow. "We can't stay out in the open for long," she murmured. "If Theon sends scouts, we might be found. Or if he loses that fight, the Ironborn could scatter across the countryside." Bran studied her face in the moonlight. She'd once been a wildling captive, a woman from beyond the wall. He recalled how Robb had distrusted her, how she'd sworn to serve in return for her life. Now, she was their best hope. She had the instincts to survive and the skill with a spear to fend off enemies. Even so, her shoulders were tense, her mouth set in a grim line. "I don't know where else to go," Bran admitted softly. "Maester Luwin always said we could look to our bannermen in times of crisis. But the war has scattered everyone, and we can't travel far with me in this chair. Could we find the Umbers?" Rickon asked, his voice small. "Or the Serwins?" "Too far," Osha said, her tone resigned. "And every road might be watched. Look, little lords, I understand you want to gather more men to retake Winterfell. But that's your brother's job. Robb's if he can come back north. Right now we need to vanish." "Damnter." Bran's throat felt tight. The notion of vanishing, of hiding away while Winterfell burned, grated at every instinct. But what choice did they have? They couldn't muster an army. They didn't even know how the battle was faring. Ser Roderick might win or might be cut down. Theon might be captured or might ride out in triumph. And in either case, the land would be full of men seeking the Stark heirs. Hodor let out a plaintive whimper, as if he sensed the depth of their troubles. Bran looked at him, recalling how many times Hodor had carried him up steps, how gently he'd set him in bed each night, how patient he was despite his size and strength. Bran reached out, placed a hand on Hodor's arm. "It's all right," he said, though he didn't believe it. "We'll be fine." They huddled in that hollow, partially shielded from the wind by the thick trunk and tangled undergrowth. Osha rummaged through the small pack she'd taken when they fled, revealing meager supplies: a skein of water, some stale bread, a wedge of cheese, and a little salted fish. Not enough to last long, but it was better than nothing. She distributed bits to everyone. Rickon devoured his share, cheeks still damp with tears, while Shaggy Dog sniffed at the fish. Osha's eyes flicked to Bran. "We've got to find a safe place to hole up for a while. A farmstead that's empty. A cave. Something." Bran gazed at the moonlit fields. "All of the farmsteads near Winterfell. I don't know who remains. So many men left with Robb, or they might have run after hearing about the Ironborn. Some might stand with Theon if they're afraid. Nandero. Some might stand with you." Osha countered gently. But we can't risk approaching them blindly. We don't know who to trust. The reminder of that betrayal stung anew. Theon had been one they trusted. If he could turn so thoroughly, who else might prove false? Bran bit his lip, letting his eyes drift shut. He tried to summon the memory of his father's voice, any words of wisdom, about loyalty, or about the North's resilience. All that came to him was the echo of winter is coming, and how his father always wore a quiet calm that hinted at deeper strength. They rested as best they could. The night wind rustled the tree branches, occasionally bringing faint echoes of the fight. Time lost meaning. Bran dozed off, jolting awake whenever Osha stirred or Rickon whimpered in his sleep. He dreamt again of ravens swirling in a black cloud, though the three-eyed raven did not appear. In the dream, he tried to stand, but his legs remained useless, pinned to the earth by invisible chains. Each time he awoke, he felt more exhausted. At last, a pale glow touched the eastern sky. Dawn was creeping across the land, turning the fields from silver to gray. Osha roused them, her expression tense. "We should move," she said. "Better to be on the move before any search parties are awake and alert. If they're out here, let's keep ourselves beyond their sight." The morning air was sharper than the night wind had been. Bran shivered, but Osha and Hodor helped him settle in the chair once more. Rickon rubbed his eyes, stifling yawns, too frightened and hungry to complain. Shaggy Dog, restless, padded ahead, sniffing for signs of prey. They slipped from the grove, picking a path through the swirling ground fog that clung to the low fields. Dull gold light streaked the horizon, painting the top of Winterfell's walls in the distance. Bran peered through the haze, unable to discern the castle's condition. He saw no columns of black smoke or tall flames, no sign of a shattered gate. Perhaps the fighting had died down, or perhaps the worst had already happened in the night. He wished he knew if Sir Roderick had managed to oust Theon, or if Theon had triumphed, but they had to assume the Ironborn were still a threat. So, with silent resolve, they pressed onward, trudging across a landscape that would soon give way to forests and scattered farm tracks. Hours passed in slow, grinding monotony. Hodor struggled with the chair's wheels on muddy patches, while Osha scanned every rise for possible enemies. Rickon clutched Shaggy Dog's fur, occasionally stumbling along. They dared not walk the main roads. Instead, Osha steered them through half-frozen fields and stands of bare-branched trees. Once, they skirted a small stream, the water crusted with thin ice at the edges. Hodor dipped the skein carefully, refilling their water. They saw no sign of pursuit at first, which was a small mercy. But as midday approached, the sun still hidden behind a blanket of gray cloud, Osha paused at the crest of a gentle slope. Below was an old cart track winding toward a cluster of thatched huts, an abandoned hamlet, it seemed. The fields around it were barren stubble. A single wind-beaten signpost stood at the junction. The words too weathered to read. "Let's see if there's shelter," Osha decided. "Maybe we'll find something to eat." The hamlet lay silent, no smoke from any chimney. They approached warily, weaving among the huts with caution. Doors hung ajar, windows shattered, as if some scuffle had taken place. Bran felt uneasy, recalling that the Ironborn had been raiding villages along the coast and rivers. This might be one of those places. They found a well at the center of the hamlet. Osha tested the rope and bucket, discovering a bit of water deep below. It smelled stale, but not foul. Rickon stooped to drink, though Osha insisted they boil it if they dared remain here long. One of the huts still had a partial roof. Osha entered first, spear at the ready. Mice skittered out, squeaking in alarm. The interior was cramped and dingy, with a table overturned and straw bedding scattered. Hodor helped Bran inside while Shaggy Dog sniffed around the door. Bran wrinkled his nose at the thick smell of old rot. A chunk of salted fish lay half-chewed in a corner, attracting flies. Rickon moved to the hearth, brushing aside soot. "No one's here," he whispered, scanning the emptiness. "Do you think they all ran away?" "Likely," Osha said. "Might have fled when they heard of raiders." "It's better than being out in the open," Bran decided, trying to sound braver than he felt. His back ached from hours in the chair, and the raw cold gnawed at his legs. Even if he couldn't feel them the way he used to, it still brought a dull ache. They set about making what small comforts they could. Osha found some scraps of old wood outside, likely from a broken fence, and Rickon stacked them in the hearth. Hodor tried to start a fire, muttering Hodor like a nervous chant. But each time he fumbled with flint, it slipped from his massive fingers. Eventually, Osha took over, her motions practiced from a lifetime in the wild. The flame caught on straw, flared, and then the wood crackled. For a time they huddled around the meager fire, hoping it wouldn't draw unwanted attention. The meager flicker of warmth felt like a luxury after the night's chill. Bran let himself relax and nibble on a piece of stale bread. Rickon crumbled his share for Shaggy Dog, who licked his fingers in gratitude. As the midday wore on, Osha decided to search the other huts for anything useful. "Stay here," she ordered. "Don't make noise. If you see anyone, hide." Hodor and the two boys nodded. The wind sighed around the hut's walls as Osha left. The timbers creaked, and the roof threatened to leak if the clouds decided to open. Bran stared into the small fire, mesmerized by the dance of flames. He thought of the roaring hearth in Winterfell's great hall, how the flames there felt welcoming, how each mealtime had been a bustle of voices and laughter. Now that memory belonged to another world. Rickon slumped beside him. He'd stopped crying, but his eyes held a haunted look. "Will Mother come for us soon?" he asked softly. Bran wished he had an answer. "She doesn't even know," he said gently. "She's with Robb. They're fighting the Lannisters." Rickon's lip quivered. "I want them to be here. I don't understand why everyone's gone." Bran's heart twisted. He was only a couple years older than Rickon, but he felt centuries weighed upon him. "We'll see them again," he said, almost believing it. "We have to be strong until then. Father used to say that Starks are made for the winter." "Nay." Rickon curled into Shaggy Dog's side. The wolf's warmth was more comforting than any words. Bran reached out a hand, petting the coarse fur of Shaggy Dog's neck. The wolf let out a soft whine, licking Rickon's face. Minutes crawled by. Hodor fiddled with a scrap of rope on the floor, occasionally glancing at Bran as though to make sure he was still there. Outside, the wind intensified, whistling through the cracks in the roof. The sky dimmed further, turning the interior gloom thicker. Bran worried about Osha, but she was cunning. She knew how to stay hidden. When she finally returned, he noticed blood on her sleeve. He stiffened, but she shook her head quickly to quiet his alarm. "Not mine. Found a body. Looked like a villager. Been dead a while." She tossed a moldy sack onto the floor. Inside were a few withered onions, a scrawny turnip, and some shriveled apples. "Better than nothing," she muttered. "There's nothing else worth taking." They made a thin stew from the onions, the turnip, and a bit of water from the well, heating it over the fire in a battered pot Osha found under a fallen chair. The smell wasn't pleasant, but the warmth soothed their bellies. Even Shaggy Dog lapped up the broth. "It'll be dark again soon," Osha observed. "We can sleep here if we keep the fire small. Best we stay hidden." Bran glanced at the door. "But if Theon's men come this way?" "We'll have warning," she replied, motioning to Hodor. "And we can slip out the back. There's a gap in the wall. Let's hope it doesn't come to that." Bemoi. Afternoon faded into a dim twilight. The sun never broke through the clouds, so the day felt gray from start to finish. They kept the hearth's flames low, just enough to keep the chill at bay. Rickon dozed in Shaggy Dog's warm fur, exhausted by worry and the strain of travel. Hodor sat near the door, leaning his head against the wall, eyes drooping. Osha crouched by the small window, spear in hand, peering out at intervals. Bran listened to the wind, the crackle of burning wood, and the unsteady beat of his own heart. Nightfall came in a hush of thickening gloom. Osha rationed the last of their bread, then banked the fire to keep it from flaring too high. None of them spoke much. The terror of the last night weighed on their thoughts. Now they were far from the immediate threat, but an even deeper uncertainty gnawed at them. They were homeless, fugitives in their own land, with only scraps to eat and nowhere truly safe to go. When it grew too dark to see anything beyond the hut, Osha settled with her back against a wall, spear across her knees, ever watchful. Bran tried to sleep, though his mind churned with images of Theon and the blazing courtyard. He drifted into a fitful doze, plagued by restless dreams. He saw direwolves prowling empty corridors, heard his father's voice echoing from somewhere unseen, and felt the heaviness of a raven's wings overshadowing him. He woke once in the middle of the night to find the fire burnt almost to embers, and Osha's silhouette hunched near the window, head drooping. He heard Hodor snoring softly. Rickon was curled on the floor, half buried in straw. Shaggy Dog lay watchful at the threshold. Bran stared at the faint orange glow, aware of the night's absolute silence. No hoofbeats pounded outside, no clash of steel. The hamlet seemed deserted as a grave. Morning came in a sluggish, dreary form. Clouds still covered the sky, and a clammy fog clung to the ground. Their meager breakfast was stale breadcrumbs washed down with well water. No sign of the Ironborn or friendlier faces appeared. At last, Osha cleared her throat and announced they would keep moving. "We can't linger. Folks might come back, or Theon's men might arrive looking for loot. Let's find somewhere less obvious." "Ness." She scanned the distance, lips pursed, as though weighing which direction might hold fewer dangers. "South leads toward the war. East goes toward White Harbor. But that's a long trek, and the roads are uncertain. West, we might get lost in the hills. There's some hunting camps out that way, I've heard." Bran rubbed a hand over his tired eyes. "I just want to be safe. Wherever we go, it should be hidden." She nodded, hefting her spear. "West, then. We'll keep away from any major roads. Stick to the lesser paths. Maybe we'll find a place near the river or in the foothills. Somewhere we can gather food until we figure out what's happening at Winterfell." "Nah." No one argued. Hodor lifted Bran into his chair and carefully guided him out the door. Outside, the hamlet was colorless in the gray morning, its broken windows staring like hollow sockets. They threaded between the huts, stepping over rubble and the remains of a burnt cart. No living souls appeared, not even a dog or a chicken. It was a place abandoned to the echoes of fear. Once on the cart track, they turned west, letting the swirling fog obscure them from any watchers behind. The hours of the morning passed in plodding silence, broken only by the rattle of Bran's chair and the occasional sniff from Shaggy Dog. The land undulated gently with low hills, skeletal trees, and patches of brush. They trudged steadily, mindful of every noise. Around midday, they halted beside a narrow stream for a short rest. While Rickon and Hodor drank, Osha scouted ahead. When she returned, her face was set in a frown. "There's a farmhouse up the slope, smoke coming from the chimney. Could be we can ask for help, but it's risky. We don't know who they'll turn us over to." Bran felt hunger gnawing at his belly. The stew from the previous day seemed a distant memory. "Do we dare?" Osha hesitated, glancing at the gray sky. "It might be better to watch from a distance first. If they're not flying the Kraken banner or some Lannister sigil, maybe we can approach." So they crept up the slope, keeping behind a line of ragged bushes. The house was a modest structure, with a thatched roof and a stone chimney. A small barn stood adjacent, its doors open, revealing empty stalls. One scrawny horse grazed near a broken fence. No guards or soldiers were in sight. A single older woman emerged at one point, carrying a bucket of water from a rain barrel, then vanished inside. The smoke trickling from the chimney suggested at least they had a fire. Osha watched for nearly half an hour before deciding. It's only an old woman and maybe a child or two. No men about. Rickon's eyes brightened at the thought of real food. "Could we could trade something." Bran had nothing to offer but the clothes on his back and his name. But in a time of war, the name Stark might invite trouble as easily as it invited loyalty. He chewed on the thought, then looked to Osha. "Maybe you go alone first. See if they're willing to give or trade something. Tell them we're travelers fleeing the war. Don't mention who we really are." She inclined her head in agreement. "Stay hidden here with the big one and the boy. If I don't come back quickly, or if you hear shouting, get away." That last part sent a chill through him. But he nodded, determined to do what was necessary. Osha passed her spear to Hodor, who held it awkwardly, and tucked a small knife in her belt, the only weapon she kept on her person. Then she rose and slipped out of the brush, walking toward the farmhouse with careful, casual strides. Bran, Hodor, and Rickon waited tensely. Shaggy Dog remained with them, alert, his green eyes flicking from the horse to the barn to the house. The wind rustled the grasses, carrying the faint bleat of a distant goat. Time dragged. Bran imagined 1,000 things that could go wrong. Perhaps the old woman would call for help, or had Ironborn allies nearby, or would panic at the sight of a wildling. Minutes passed, then the house door opened. Bran glimpsed Osha standing in the doorway, speaking with someone inside. He couldn't make out the words. A moment later, she vanished into the house. Rickon fidgeted. Shaggy Dog whined softly. Bran tried to stay calm, glancing around, expecting to see a band of raiders cresting the hill at any moment. But the land stayed as empty as before. The old horse flicked its tail and wandered closer to the barn. Finally, the door opened again. Osha emerged, waving them over. Bran let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Hodor pushed the chair forward, Rickon at his side, while Shaggy Dog trotted ahead, nose low to the ground. At the threshold, Bran observed the interior. A single large room with a dirt floor, a hearth at one end, a rough wooden table at the other. The old woman stood near the fire, stirring a pot that smelled of cooked beans. Her face was deeply lined, her hair sparse and white. At her feet was a small boy, perhaps 5 or 6, holding a wooden cup. He stared at Rickon and Shaggy Dog with open-mouthed wonder. The woman eyed Bran in his chair. "Your friend says you're fleeing the fighting," she said in a rasping voice. "You'll find little enough safety here. I barely have 2 beans to feed my own." Bran dipped his head in gratitude. "We won't be trouble, I promise. We've been running." He let his voice trail off, unsure how much to reveal. She sniffed. "Running from who? Lannisters or Greyjoy's scum?" Rickon opened his mouth to speak, but Osha cut in smoothly. "We want nothing to do with any of them. We just need a place to rest, maybe trade for a meal." "Nassay." The old woman grunted and gestured at the pot. "I've a bit to spare. The fields outside are rotted. No good harvest this year. My son died in the war, and my daughter left to join her husband's family. Only me and my grandson remain." She cast a weary glance at the boy, who clung to her skirts. "We've heard rumors of Ironborn raiding near the shore. Some say the Northmen are off fighting the Lannisters, leaving us unprotected." Bran nodded, heart twisting at her mention of a lost son. Many families across the north shared similar griefs. He felt the weight of guilt anew, though he knew it was not his fault that war had come. She turned back to the pot, dishing out portions of watery beans into wooden bowls. The smell made Bran's stomach rumble. When she handed him a bowl, he offered a small smile and thanks, noticing her fingers were knotted with age and rheumatism. Rickon practically inhaled his share, while Osha ate slowly, eyes always scanning the windows and door. Hodor repeated, "Hodor?" in a questioning tone, but the old woman only squinted at him, uncertain. Still, she handed him a bowl as well. He tipped it back carefully, draining the broth. The boy hiding behind her skirt peeked at Shaggy Dog. "Is that a wolf?" he asked in a timid whisper. Rickon turned, wiping bean juice from his chin. "He's a direwolf." The boy's eyes went huge. "That's the biggest wolf I ever seen." Shaggy Dog seemed to sense the child's curiosity and approached with a low sniff. He was half-grown, big enough to intimidate any adult, but the boy reached out a trembling hand. Shaggy Dog sniffed it and gave a small chuff, as if approving. Rickon looked proud. The old woman stared at the direwolf with caution, but not outright fear. She returned her attention to Bran. "You can rest the night here if you wish, though I have little enough bedding. The barn might serve better for your lot. It's only the boy and me in this house." Osha nodded in agreement. "We'll stay out of your way, thank you." Bran wondered what the woman would think if she knew he was a Stark of Winterfell. Perhaps she might feel loyalty, or perhaps she would resent him for the war that had swept her son away. Better, for now, to remain a nameless traveler. They spent the afternoon in the barn, a shelter from the cutting wind. It smelled of old hay and manure, but the roof seemed intact. A corner loft had scattered straw that could serve as makeshift bedding. Osha got a small fire going in a broken clay brazier, venting the smoke through a hole in the wall. Rickon eagerly clambered up the wooden ladder to see if the loft had any treasure, only to find more dust than straw. Hodor carried Bran up carefully, step by step, until he rested among the straw with a blanket draped over him. It wasn't truly comfortable, but it was far better than being out in the cold. Shaggydog padded around, sniffing suspiciously, as though expecting to find a lurking cat or rat. The hours passed slowly. Now and then, the old woman appeared in the barn doorway to hand them a bit of cornbread or a mug of hot broth. She never asked questions beyond the polite, "You faring all right?" or "Is the wolf tame?" Once her grandson peered in, wide-eyed, but scurried away when Hodor gave a friendly grin. At sunset, faint pink light slid through the cracks in the barn's walls. Bran and Osha conferred in low voices while Rickon busied himself with Shaggydog, trying to keep the wolf calm. "What do we do next?" Bran asked. Voice hushed. Osha gazed toward the open door, where a rectangle of fading light revealed the distant fields. "We can't stay here too long. The old woman might not betray us. But in these times, desperate folk make desperate choices. If any Ironborn or Lannister outriders come sniffing around, she might trade our location for safety." Bran nodded, gloom settling over him. "You're right. Maybe tomorrow we move on." Rickon overheard. "I like it here," he murmured with a small frown. "It's warm, and there's food." Osha ruffled his hair. "Ay, but it's not safe. We need a place where no one can find us if they try." They agreed to leave at dawn. Until then, they would keep watching shifts. Bran tried to ease the ache in his back, adjusting straw beneath him. The day's tension weighed heavily, each moment overshadowed by memories of what they'd fled. He thought of Winterfell, uncertain who ruled it now. Perhaps by some miracle, Ser Roderick had reclaimed it. But if so, would they send riders to search for the young Starks lost in the wild? The night descended, bringing quiet. Osha took first watch, perched near the barn door with her spear. Hodor sprawled on his side, dozing after the day's exertion. Rickon snuggled up to Shaggydog, who kept an ear pricked for any threat. Bran tried to find comfort in the muffled hush, but his thoughts churned. Eventually, he drifted into a shallow sleep. Dreams gnawed at him. Distant calls of a raven, the image of the heart tree in Winterfell's Godswood. Weeping red sap. He saw Theon's face twisted in regret or rage. He couldn't tell which, and a swirl of black water rising around the castle walls. Then the dream shifted, and he was in a tower with no door, staring out at an endless forest. A hidden presence whispered for him to fly, but when he looked down, he was bound to the chair, with chains encircling his legs. He woke sharply, gasping. The barn's interior was dark, lit only by a single lantern Osha had scavenged from the old woman. The air smelled of stale hay and faint smoke. He realized that Rickon was awake too, blinking at him from across the loft. "Bran," he whispered, voice husky with sleep. "Did you have a nightmare?" Bran nodded, swallowing. "I'm fine," he lied. Rickon hugged his arms around himself. "Me too. I dreamt Mother came back, but she wouldn't speak to me. She just walked away." Bran felt a swell of pity for his little brother. "She loves you," he said softly. "She'll come for us, someday." Rickon gave a tiny nod but said nothing more. After a while, the boy lay down again, cuddling into Shaggydog's thick fur. Bran stared at the ceiling, heart heavy. Before dawn, Osha roused them, indicating it was time to go. Outside, the old woman was already up, stirring a pot over her hearth. She offered each of them a bowl of thin porridge, shaking her head at their talk of leaving so soon. "War's not done," she said in a weary voice. "You may as well stay off the roads." Osha thanked her, but refused to linger. They had nothing to give her in return for her kindness, except their gratitude. Rickon offered the small wooden direwolf carving he'd once gifted Bran, but Bran quickly pressed it back into his brother's hand, whispering, "Keep it. Father would want you to." Instead, Osha handed over a small iron knife she'd found in the hamlet, a poor trade for the food and shelter, but the best they could do. The old woman accepted it with a nod. "If you're truly fleeing from the Greyjoy filth, may the gods guide you." Watch yourselves. The roads are rife with bandits and soldiers alike. They departed at first light, stepping into damp grass where a layer of dew glistened. Thin fog clung to the low ground. They skirted around the barn, collecting their meager supplies. Shaggy Dog trotted ahead, nose to the air. The old woman stood at her door, silently watching them go. Her grandson peered out from behind her skirt. Neither called farewell, as if words were too costly in these times. They pressed westward, the morning stretching pale and uncertain before them. The fields gradually gave way to rolling terrain. Occasional clusters of trees broke up the horizon. OSHA kept them off any main track, forging a winding path over rough ground. Bran felt every jolt in the wheels of his chair, wincing each time a stone or root caught the rim. Hodor trudged on, tireless but glum, repeating his name whenever the path grew especially difficult. By midday, a drizzle began to fall. It was a cold, persistent mist, soaking their furs and making the soil slick. The sky overhead turned into an unbroken sheet of gray. Each breath exhaled a cloud. Bran's teeth began to chatter, and Rickon shivered despite Shaggy Dog's presence. OSHA muttered curses about the weather, scanning for any shelter. At last, they found a stand of ancient oaks near a small ravine. The ground dropped away sharply, revealing a stream running below. "There," OSHA said, pointing to a rocky overhang that jutted from the ravine wall. "It's not a proper cave, but it'll keep us drier than nothing." They trudged down the slope, searching for footholds in the slippery mud. Hodor guided Bran's chair with extreme care, nearly losing his footing once or twice. Rickon ended up sliding on his backside half the way, laughing a bit despite the gloom. Shaggy Dog bounded ahead, shaking off water as he went. Under the overhang, they found a shallow space protected from the worst of the drizzle. The rock face formed a curve around them, leaving the ground mostly dry. Fallen leaves carpeted one side, and OSHA brushed them aside to clear a spot for a small fire. She rummaged for tinder in a pouch. Hodor stood near the edge, letting Bran gaze out at the stream below, which rushed along in a hurried flow. Bran's legs were soaked from the drizzle, though they felt more numb than wet. He flexed his fingers, rubbing them for warmth. The wind that swept through the ravine was colder, still, carrying the smell of damp stone and rotting leaves. They built a small fire against the rock, coaxing a flicker of orange flame. It cast dancing shadows on the stone. Rickon crouched close, palms outstretched, seeking warmth. OSHA eyed the opening warily, as if expecting company any minute. Bran tried to shake off the creeping despair. Another day, another makeshift shelter, another meal of stale rations. They were surviving, but for how long? The possibility of searching for loyal bannermen kept tugging at Bran's mind. If he could contact one of the houses still aligned with Stark, they might have enough men to rescue Winterfell, assuming Theon even still held it. But OSHA was right about the risks. They didn't know who might have turned coat, or who might betray them for favor with the Iron Islands or the Lannisters. "What if we try to go north?" he asked, more to himself than to OSHA, gazing at the swirling drizzle outside. "We could reach the wall, maybe ask for help from the Night's Watch." OSHA stiffened. She gave a rueful shake of her head. "No, Dot. Not me. I'll not go back that way. It's my place, the land beyond the wall. But there are other terrors I'd sooner not face." Bran recalled faint scraps of stories. The others, White Walkers, Whites. He remembered how OSHA had tried to warn them that something was stirring in the far north. "But the Night's Watch might help us," he insisted softly. "Maybe," she allowed. "And maybe not. The Watch might not want to be dragged into these wars. They have troubles enough of their own." The conversation faded. They ate a silent lunch of dried fish, shivering in their damp clothes. The drizzle continued, turning the ravine slick. The hours of afternoon stretched, each moment thick with uncertainty. By the time dusk settled, the rain had eased, but the sky remained ominous. They built the fire higher, hoping to chase off the worst of the cold. Rickon and Hodor carried extra leaves and brush to form a crude mat for Bran's chair, so it wouldn't sink into the mud. Shaggy Dog prowled around, sniffing at the perimeter. As night fell, OSHA decided they would remain there until morning. It was too dangerous to travel the muddy ravine in the dark. So they settled, huddled close to the fire. A gloom pressed on Bran's heart as he watched the glowing embers flicker. How many nights would they spend running? Was there truly no refuge for the sons of Eddard Stark? He thought of the crypts. How ironically, it had felt safer to hide among the dead than to face Theon's Ironborn. Now, they were in the wilderness, forced to wonder if Theon even lived. For all Bran knew, Theon was now a prisoner, or a corpse. Or worse yet, maybe he truly was Prince of Winterfell, having repelled Sir Roderick and seized permanent control. Bran couldn't bear not knowing. A flicker of defiance sparked within him, a memory of his father's teachings. The North was bigger than one man's ambition. If Theon had taken Winterfell, that didn't mean the end of House Stark. Robb was still out there, declared king in the North. And so long as Bran and Rickon were alive, the lineage was unbroken. But it was a heavy burden to carry while shivering in a ravine, uncertain of the next meal. They talked little that night. The crackle of the fire and the rush of the stream, their only lullabies. Bran dozed, drifting in and out of troubled slumber, haunted by fleeting images. The deserted corridors of Winterfell. The heart tree in the God's Wood shedding tears of red sap. And distant howls that might have been the wind or wolves. Once he startled awake, certain he'd heard Summer's voice calling him. But only the hush of damp night greeted his ears. At dawn they crawled out from under the rocky overhang. The sky was still choked with clouds, but at least the rain had stopped. Osha tested the slope. It remained slippery, but they could manage if they went slow. The morning air nipped at their faces, cold enough to stiffen their joints. "Let's move," Osha said once they'd doused the fire with stream water. "Best we find higher ground. These ravines are tricky if we get more rain." Hodor pushed Bran's chair with painstaking care, aided by Osha steadying the wheels when they hit a rut or stone. Rickon followed, occasionally sliding but catching himself on the muddy bank. Shaggy Dog led the way, sniffing the ground to find the surest path. At last they climbed onto the plateau above, where the land spread out in a patchwork of small wooded valleys and meandering streams. The day passed in a slow trudge with little conversation. Hunger gnawed at them all, their supplies nearly depleted. By mid-afternoon the drizzle threatened to return, so Osha directed them to a line of low hills, hoping to find some natural shelter. As they approached, the wind carried a faint smell of smoke, but not wood smoke. This was the acrid tang of something burned more recently. Bran felt dread coil in his stomach. Could it be another farm? He asked quietly. Osha shrugged. Could be, or a camp that was torched. Either way, we should be cautious. They continued, senses alert. Even Shaggy Dog seemed agitated, hackles rising as he turned his head to sniff the breeze. Rounding a gentle curve, they came upon the blackened ruins of a small camp or outpost, nestled at the base of the hills. Charred timber stuck up like jagged teeth. White wisps of smoke curled from smoldering beams. The ground was littered with debris, broken tools, scraps of cloth, and ominous dark stains. Rickon gasped, clapping a hand to his mouth. Bran felt his pulse pound. This destruction looked recent. Shaggy Dog let out a low, uneasy growl, muzzle wrinkling at the stench. A horse carcass lay in the muddy grass, half covered by crows that flapped into the air when the group approached. Hodor made a distressed sound, turning his face away. Bran forced himself to look, to make sense of what had happened. Could it have been a band of Ironborn raiders? Or perhaps some other foe passing through? Osha crouched beside a fallen bit of cloth, frowning. She lifted it to the light. The cloth bore a partial sigil in faded thread, 2 towers. A piece of the banner of House Frey, maybe. But it was stained with blood, the design barely recognizable. Soldiers. Must have been a small group camped out here, she said, glancing around. They were attacked and overrun. Hard to say by who. Bran's heart sank. The war had splintered the North into scattered battles, with men from all corners crossing the land. No wonder chaos reigned in every village. He looked at Osha. Should we see if anyone survived? She pursed her lips. If they did, they're likely gone. But we can check for supplies. We're running on empty ourselves. Nah, it's a knee. Though the idea felt grim, the necessity of survival won out. They picked among the wreckage, rummaging for anything edible or useful. Bran stayed in his chair at the edge, watching the horizon nervously. Rickon hovered near him, too horrified to explore. Meanwhile, Osha and Hodor ventured into the charred skeleton of what might have been a storage shed, clearing rubble and ash. Before long, Osha returned, holding a small sack of barley, half-burnt but still partially salvageable. "We can make a thin porridge out of this," she said, voice grim. "Not much, but it'll keep us alive another day or two." She handed Rickon a dented metal cup, which the boy clutched like a treasure. It might help them boil water. Hodor found a horse blanket relatively unscathed by flame, which they could use to layer over Bran's legs for warmth. But there was no fresh water source here, only a muddy puddle reeking of soot. As they finished searching, Rickon called out softly, "Look!" He pointed to a half-collapsed lean-to, where a figure lay face down in the ash. It was an older man, his back covered with a tattered cloak. The posture suggested death, but Rickon stared as though uncertain. Osha stepped forward, rolling the body over with the handle of her spear. The man's face was scorched, eyes open and vacant. She shook her head, rummaging carefully through his cloak. "Nothing," she said, standing. "No coin, no food. Everything's gone." Bran swallowed, feeling nauseated. This was the brutal face of the war he'd been spared from seeing in Winterfell's halls, until the Ironborn had come. Now, it seemed inescapable. He watched as Osha turned to survey the horizon again, her expression tight. "We should leave," she said. "There's no telling who might come back. This place is a graveyard." They departed quickly, mindful of the crows circling overhead. Evening approached, painting the sky in pale lavender and dusty rose. The drizzle returned in a light, intermittent shower, making the hills slippery. Osha guided them away from the blackened camp, pressing on until they reached a small hollow sheltered by a few scraggly trees. There, they paused to catch breath, each weighed down by the grim discovery. As the shadows grew, Osha built a small fire. She used the barley to cook a thin porridge in the metal cup, taking turns so each of them might sip a bit. The taste was acrid from bits of soot that clung to the grain. Still, it was warm, and it staved off the worst pangs of hunger. Rickon grimaced but drank anyway, then offered a few spoonfuls to Shaggy Dog. The wolf lapped it, though it was hardly to his liking. Night brought a drop in temperature. Hodor clutched the new blanket around Bran's legs, tucking it in carefully, as though to apologize for the meager comfort. "Hodor," he murmured. Bran managed a small smile in thanks. They huddled in silence, eyes on the wavering fire. The drizzle hissed as it hit the embers, sending up tiny curls of steam. From somewhere far off came the howl of a lone wolf. Shaggy Dog stiffened, ears pricked, but it was only a distant cousin's voice. That night, Bran dreamed again of the crypts in Winterfell. Long, silent corridors, lined with stone effigies of ancient lords. He heard a faint voice in the dark, calling his name. He tried to follow it, but the corridor stretched on and on without end, each flickering torch revealing another row of carved faces. Then he heard Rickon's cry echo from behind him, and he turned back, losing the voice that beckoned him forward. He stumbled through the crypt, his useless legs somehow carrying him in the dream, until he found only emptiness. He woke shivering. The drizzle turned into a heavier rain that battered the hollow. Osha scrambled to shield the fire, cursing as wind gusted droplets across them. Hodor stood, arms spread, trying to keep water off Bran's chair. Rickon woke with a gasp, hugging Shaggy Dog for warmth. Their meager shelter offered little protection. The remainder of the night passed in miserable, sodden confusion. By dawn, the fire was down to wet coals, and the group was damp to the bone. The hillside around them glistened with fresh mud, making any movement treacherous. Osha, bleary-eyed, glared at the sky as if it had personally offended her. "We'll have to wait until the ground's less slick," she said, "or risk sliding down the slope." They waited another hour, huddled under branches. Hodor's teeth chattered, and Rickon sniffled. Bran tried to keep his spirits up. The day was a dismal gray, but at least the downpour had eased to drizzle again. At length, they pressed on, forging a path around the base of the hills to avoid the worst of the mud. The land sloped gently downward, leading to another shallow stream. Footing improved slightly as the morning advanced. Beyond the stream, the terrain flattened into a broad plain with patches of thick gorse. That didn't necessarily mean safety, but at least there'd be fewer sudden drops. The hours blurred as they trudged. Osha's gaze swept the horizon constantly, searching for any sign of men on horseback or plumes of campfire smoke. They saw none, though once or twice Shaggy Dog perked his ears, as if catching a scent on the wind. The drizzle seeped into their clothes. They had no real shelter from it, no spare boots or cloaks. Hunger gnawed at Bran's belly, and thirst tugged at his throat, though they dared drink from a trickling spring to stave it off. Bran thought of the old stories, how the kings in the north had once roamed this land with proud retinues and banners. Now he, a Stark prince, was reduced to this pitiful crawl. He recalled the stable, the courtyard, the tall towers he used to climb. He missed Summer's presence, the comforting sense of a guardian at his side. But it was Rickon who had his wolf, Shaggy Dog, fierce and dark, protecting them all. They paused near midday, seeking respite under a leaning willow. The ground beneath was relatively dry, the thick canopy catching the drizzle. Osha and Hodor lowered Bran's chair, letting him rest. Rickon knelt, rummaging through what remained of their supplies, little more than a handful of barley and a single onion. "I'm hungry," Rickon muttered. Bran understood. He felt weak, dizzy with it. Osha sighed. "I'll see if I can hunt, but there's little game stirring in this weather." She eyed Shaggy Dog. "He might help sniff out rabbits if any exist. Keep the fire smoke low if you make one." She left the spear behind for Hodor's protection, carrying a short knife and her determined scowl as she moved into the brush. Shaggy Dog and Rickon followed at a short distance, hoping to flush any prey. Bran settled into wait, arms curled around himself, while Hodor tried to coax a small fire from damp sticks. The minutes stretched on. Rain pattered overhead, the leaves whispering with each drop. Hodor managed to kindle a fragile flame, but the damp wood smoked heavily. Bran coughed, tears prickling his eyes from the pungent haze. Abruptly, the snap of twigs made him tense. He turned, expecting Osha or Rickon. Instead, a figure emerged from the brush, a man cloaked in dark wool, face partially hidden by a cowl. He froze at the sight of Bran and Hodor, gaze flicking to the sputtering fire. Hodor sprang to his feet, fumbling with the spear, uncertain whether to threaten or retreat. The man lifted empty hands, showing he held no weapon. His voice was rough, middle-aged. "Easy now. I mean no harm." Bran's heart hammered. For all they knew, this stranger might be a scout for the Ironborn or some rogue band. Hodor clutched the spear, repeating, "Hodor," in a trembling growl. The stranger took a careful step back. "I'm just passing through. Saw your smoke." Bran swallowed, mustering courage. "Who are you?" The man hesitated, pulling back his hood slightly to reveal a weathered face and short, patchy beard. "Name's Colin. I'm from the Riverlands originally, heading north to avoid the war." He shrugged, scanning them with wary curiosity. "Looks like you're not bandits, at least. A boy in a chair, a big friend with a spear. No threat to me." Hodor made a rumbling sound, as if to contradict that. Bran's mind whirled, trying to decide how to respond. If this man recognized them as Starks, it could change everything. But he might also have food or news. "We're just traveling," Bran said carefully. "We mean no trouble either." Colin nodded, relaxing a fraction. He took a few more cautious steps closer, eyeing the small fire. "It's a miserable day for travel. Mind if I warm myself for a moment?" Hodor looked to Bran, uncertain. Bran took a breath. The man didn't appear armed beyond a small knife at his belt. If he had companions, they weren't in sight. "All right," Bran said, gesturing. "But only a moment. And don't try anything." Colin gave a tired chuckle. "Not sure what I could try, boy. You see me shaking with cold, not with cunning." He approached slowly, hands still visible, and crouched by the fire. A hiss of steam rose from his sodden cloak. "Damn endless war. Been running half my life from one army or another." Bran studied him. Lines on his face suggested weariness, maybe regrets. "You're alone?" "Eh," Colin said, frowning at the smoke. "Lost my family to raiders near the Twins. I've been wandering since, looking for a safe corner of the north." Bran glanced at Hodor, who still held the spear stiffly. Hodor's discomfort radiated in every muscle. Colin noticed, lifting his hands in a placating gesture. "I understand your caution." They sat in uneasy silence for a time, the drizzle pattering around them. Colin occasionally rubbed his hands near the flame, never meeting Bran's gaze for too long. Finally, he spoke softly. "Word is, the Iron Islands have seized some holdfasts in the north. Heard rumors the Starks were scattered. Might be the Bolton or Manderley men rallying to oust them, but the roads are thick with outlaws. Take care if you're traveling." Bran absorbed that news. So Theon's hold might extend beyond Winterfell. "Do you know if Winterfell stands?" he asked, trying to keep the desperation from his voice. Colin shrugged. "Last I heard, the Greyjoy boy took it, but there was fighting. Maybe they drove him out. Maybe not." He eyed Bran curiously. "Why'd you ask? You got kin there?" Bran's lips parted, searching for a believable half-truth. "Something like that," he said. "We had to leave in a hurry. Don't know what became of the castle." Colin nodded gravely, accepting that. "Hard times for everyone, boy. If you're wise, you'll steer clear. Let the lords fight their battles. Ain't nothing for small folk, but grief." Hodor shifted, repeating, "Hodor," under his breath. The weight of the spear in his hands served as a reminder of how vulnerable they were. Bran looked at Colin. "We can't go south, and heading east is dangerous. Where would you go if you were us?" The man mulled that, brushing a lock of wet hair from his face. "Deep into the Wolfswood, maybe, or along the tributaries near the rills. Fewer lords, fewer raiders. Live off the land until the war is done." He let out a humorless chuckle. "If it ever ends." Footsteps rustled in the brush. Osha and Rickon emerged, Shaggy Dog trotting ahead. The wolf bristled at the sight of an unfamiliar man by the fire, baring teeth. Rickon gripped Osha's hand. "Who's that?" he demanded, glaring with a child's boldness. Colin raised an eyebrow. "Easy now, lad." Osha leveled her gaze at Bran. "Everything all right here?" Bran nodded. "He stumbled across our fire. Says he's traveling alone." Colin held still, sensing Osha's tension. She carried no bow, but her posture was that of a hunter, and Shaggy Dog's growl promised a savage bite if he made one wrong move. "I'll be on my way," Colin offered, rising slowly. "Didn't mean to alarm anyone." Osha gave him a curt nod. "We'll not stop you." The man lingered just long enough to say, "Take care, travelers. The north is no safe haven nowadays." Then, with a final glance at the direwolf, he turned and tramped off into the drizzle. They watched until his silhouette vanished behind the willow's drooping branches. Rickon released a shaky breath. "He was lucky Shaggy didn't bite him." Osha shook her head. "A man alone isn't likely to pick a fight with 4 people, one of them a direwolf. But it's good to stay wary." She displayed 2 small rabbits she'd snared in the brush. "Supper. We'll need to skin and roast them quickly if we mean to keep moving by nightfall." The day crept on. Osha prepared the rabbits as best she could, while Rickon helped gather tinder for a fresh flame. The drizzle eased slightly, enough that the smoke of their fire rose into the damp air in a lazy column. Bran watched the trees, half expecting Colin to reappear, either with reinforcements or out of desperation. But no one came. The only watchers were crows perched high in the branches, black eyes glittering. When the rabbit meat was cooked, chewy and underseasoned, but filling, they ate hungrily, mindful of each bite. Hodor hummed in relief at the taste of real protein after days of meager rations. Shaggy Dog gnawed at leftover scraps, bones cracking under his powerful jaws. Afterward, they quenched the fire and gathered themselves to continue. As they moved on, Osha's thoughts seemed to circle back to what Colin had said. Living off the land, finding remote corners. She shared them with Bran, explaining that while it might be unpleasant, it could be their best chance. If we keep wandering from place to place, we risk running into someone who'll recognize you or want a reward. But if we find a hidden glen, we could hunt and wait out the war." Rickon scrunched his face. "For how long?" Osha shrugged. "As long as it takes. Till the Ironborn leave or King Rob returns." Bran mulled that grim prospect. Hiding indefinitely in the wild felt so hopeless. But maybe it was the only way. He looked at Rickon, small and weary, then at Hodor, so gentle yet so vulnerable to deception, and he thought of the old gods. How perhaps they were watching, though he felt no sign of their guidance, beyond a faint dread in his dreams. "All right," Bran said. "We'll keep going west, or wherever you think we might find thick forests. But if we see any sign of a bannerman loyal to House Stark, I want to talk to them. We have to at least try." Osha's face showed reluctant agreement. If we find such a sign. Though by now, who knows who's loyal." "That's so." They trudged on into the murk of late afternoon, hearts weighed by uncertainties. Each step took them further from Winterfell, deeper into a realm shaped by war and fear. The hills rose and fell, like the slow breathing of a sleeping giant. By evening, the drizzle finally stopped, leaving a damp hush over the land. The clouds parted just enough for a sliver of pale moonlight. They made camp near a line of boulders, building a small fire behind their bulk to hide the light. As Rickon dozed, Osha quietly told Bran that if the skies cleared, she could navigate by the stars, guiding them to the Wolf's Wood eventually. The forest there was vast, with hidden places aplenty. She might know of old ruins or caves where they could hole up. Bran's voice was hollow as he replied, "Whatever's best. I trust you." She studied him for a moment, eyes softening. "You're still a boy, but you've shown more sense than many grown men I've seen. I know this is hard on you." He forced a small smile. "Better to be alive, right?" She nodded. "And you've got your brother to protect. Never forget that." Her words were both comfort and burden. Bran watched Rickon's sleeping form, the child's chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. In the day's final light, Shaggy Dog's black fur glistened with a dull sheen. The wolf always vigilant, Hodor hovered at Bran's side, patting his arm gently as if to reassure him. And so the night wore on, and day followed night. They journeyed west in slow, grueling increments, seeking the Wolf's Wood or any place to hide. One day bled into another, under the same gray sky. Sometimes they found small streams, sometimes only muddy puddles. They snared what game they could. Rabbits, the occasional squirrel. They foraged for wild roots and mushrooms that Osha recognized as edible. More than once, they went to bed hungry. The land showed signs of war's passage, burned farms, scattered corpses, abandoned wagons, footprints of men who might be brigands or soldiers. They avoided all, living like ghosts at the edges of ruin. Colin's warnings proved true. There were no safe roads, no easy havens. They never saw Theon's men, nor did they stumble upon loyal Stark bannermen. Only emptiness stretched out, dotted with fear's remnants. Despite the hardship, Osha guided them on, determined to reach dense forest. At night, when the clouds parted, she studied the stars to confirm their direction. Bran often lay awake, gazing at the unfamiliar shapes in the sky, feeling a pang of longing for Winterfell's walls. He wondered if a few loyal souls still lingered there, or if the castle was now a husk inhabited by Ironborn. He thought of Maester Luwin, of old Nan, of the kitchens he used to roam in search of treats. He thought of summer, locked in a kennel or roaming free among the rubble. The memories twisted at his heart until he could barely breathe. But each morning, he awoke to find Rickon curled at his side, and Hodor patiently helping him into the chair, and Osha forging ahead. He clung to that fragile tether, that sense of purpose. They were still alive, still together. That had to mean something. And so they continued, day after weary day, pressed on by the harsh truth that they had nowhere else to go. They moved like shadows, hoping the wolves of war would pass them by. Ever westward, ever deeper into the unknown, they carried the Stark name in secret, unsure if the North they had once known would ever be whole again.